Ready, aim, release! Hello! We're back. Carlo, it's another Monday. It's been another week. In the UK, we've had the Jubilee, so most people have had like an extended weekend of like 4 days off. I think it was it Memorial Day last week in the US? So they had a day off as well.
Maybe.
Yeah. So yeah, it's all fun and games. All fun and games for everybody.
Game week. Everybody loves it.
Yeah, exactly. So it's also the end of May. It is officially June as of, well, technically it was June last week, but it was May when we did the episode last week. So now it's June. So this is the first June episode, which means we've got the May stats, which we are going to look through in due course. Just to see if there's anything interesting that we see. Maybe, do you think Mother of Dragons? Do you think anyone would have taken up the Mother of Dragons challenge? No?
Maybe. I saw NSB play Mother of Dragons just earlier today. Obviously, won't be included in those stats. But
was that Mother of Dragons? I think it was Queen of Marine.
Was it? Oh, fair enough.
I think it was a Queen of Marine.
I kind of just assumed it was MOD, but yeah, of course, there's no reason why it had to be. No. Yeah, why would you when Queen of Marine is better? I think that her play rate is still almost non-existent. Actually, it's interesting. I mean, there's a possibility that not quite all the stats are there, but I find I always have a flick through them when they first go up, just to make sure everything looks mostly right. It's interesting to me how consistent things are month to month. There are some things that change in their play rate. Actually, what is wildly, crazily consistent is the play rate of stuff. The play rate of various factions almost never changes.
Mm-hmm.
It was, yet you can see a massive difference between what the play rate in 2021 balance versus season 1 balance is. So, like, basically, the factions that got better, their play rates jumped up. And the factions that got worse, their play rates that nosedived by like 4-5% maybe. And then they're just consistent, like they're just flat over the whole edition. So I think it's quite interesting that people's perception about factions don't really change, and people's interest in factions are so obviously tied to the power level of the faction, and yet there's not much change there. There's not much change in what we see from.
Well, we'll have a look. We'll have a little look at that later on in a bit more detail. See where factions all are and things like that. See if it, be interested to see if it marries up with some of the tournaments we see. Certainly the bigger tournaments, or if it says something a lot about people playing them in tournaments versus perhaps more casual settings. Non-tournament style factions that we pick up. But yeah, cool. So I guess the first thing to talk about this week, though. The very first thing to talk about is a piece of news that was shared with us last week from a TO in the US who had been emailing CMON Organised Play, specifically Robert Fulkerson, and essentially from what has been passed down the grapevine is that Robert Fulkerson is no longer going to be the head of Organised Play. The actual email that he'd said as this message response was that the Organised Play team had been let go. Of course, that doesn't really mean anything when the only person we knew who was responsible was Robert. And actually, if you do check out if anyone ever does this, if you check out any of Robert's public-facing profile pages on the likes of Facebook, where he is, active on there, and he does post and things on the main Facebook groups, it does say that he is a former employee of CMON, not a current. So this is not news that's like fake. It is true.
Mm-hmm.
whether or not he is being just replaced, they've got rid of him and they're putting someone else in place. Whether or not they are getting rid of the organized play team entirely and they're doing a new type of structure, nobody knows. I think
to anybody who's in the chat, or I mean, Mickey, maybe you know.
Yep.
Out of all the other CMON games, if anybody's involved in them, has anybody ever heard the term organized play come up from a different game? Is effectively the question. Like, does organized play exist outside of A Song of Ice and Fire? Has anybody ever heard of it in terms of reference to Zombicide or reference to like anything else? Or was it entirely created for Song? Is roughly my question to anybody listening. Maybe comment afterwards if you know and you're watching back later. I'd be super interested. Because I'm not close to the ground on other things that CMON are doing, other games that are going on, what other things Robert Wilkerson possibly did or didn't have involvement in. So anybody let me know.
Yeah, I mean, I do think, as far as I'm aware with CMON, I do think organized play was only for Song of Ice and Fire. They did it right. They did it for card games, so Arcadia Quest and Bloodborne, the card game. Yeah.
And do they use that term? Organized play?
I've just found an article back here from CMON Feature Friday. This is back in 2017. The joy of organized play, and they specifically big game events also provide an opportunity for organized play in brackets OP. And they have this was back in, this is 5 years ago now, but they're talking about having an organized play coordinator, who at the time was Heather Sauerhart. So clearly organized play has existed at CMON for other games and for some time.
Interesting. Yeah.
So it's difficult, isn't it?
You should, right? Like a game. I am very much of the opinion that if you want a game to have any kind of community, it has to have organized play. That's my opinion. That's one of the reasons why the site is the way the site is, because I believe that there needs to be a central hub for where organized play exists, and CMON never made one, so I made one. I think that's a large part of what brings a community together, and you must have a community if you want to maintain like a store game as opposed to a Kickstarter game. If you want to maintain like an active player base, then that's all required, in my opinion. And some people do it really, really well, and some people do it not so well.
I'm aware. Certainly, I mean, the CMON website at the moment refers to CMON Play, and it does list on there the various different games that they're currently supporting on offers. They've currently got out lots of various different versions of Zombicide, a couple of other little things. I am very aware that support mechanism has not been in place for A Song of Ice and Fire for some time from CMON, the CMON Play aspect on their main website. That was where I believe you were able to obtain the old Game Night kits, which of course, as we know, Game Night 3 never came out. With, what was it, Alternate Vargo, I think?
Alt Vargo.
Yeah.
With a goat helmet on.
Yeah.
Exactly the same model as far as I know, with the goat helmet.
Yeah. So Song isn't listed on there. The organized play on the Song of Ice and Fire.cmon.com website is still a log. You can still log in, sign up with a store and things like that. So that hasn't been depreciated as of yet. I guess we'll see in time if that gets changed or removed. But certainly, I mean, it still has loads of places registered on there as distributors and as stores. So yeah, there's no reason to suggest it's just disappeared.
Yeah, but it definitely casts some doubt over the future of things like the World Championship. Casts doubt over obtaining the same kind of levels of support as was had by some tournaments in the past. Not all, but some were very generously supported. Big question marks over what it means going forward. I don't think that we'll get any answers. We'll just have to wait and see and figure it out, because they haven't even made any kind of official announcement. I don't expect them ever to make an official announcement about it. So also, the kind of they're far more likely, if they decided that they were cancelling the World Championships, as an example, right? To basically sweep it under the rug and say, we never announced the World Championships, kind of thing. They'll just hope it goes away quietly, rather than coming out with an announcement, by the way, we cancelled all our organised play and there isn't a World Championships anymore in 2023. They're far more just let it go away kind of response.
Yeah. I do think we'll see, right? We will see, I guess, in time, if anything comes of OP, the organised play scenario. It does, however, like you say, is cast doubts. It casts doubts on a lot of things, be it, even the LGT, which we'll get onto in a short second. A lot of people, I know that Mikel, what is being organised in Spain, has had some hiccups with that, because he's been working with Robert and the team over there to try and get support for what's happening in Spain, events there. Obviously, many people in Europe for the various different nationals that are happening all over the place, and US stores, responding to their the qualifiers for US Nats. On that topic, there was actually today rumors from it's on the Sunday Slaughter Discord from one of the American players and TOs that organized play the organized play email is not responding. Now, whether or not that is the case, that might just be because no one's picking it up. It's notorious that you just have to wait for answers from that. So that's
Yeah, I would say the previous response time wasn't exactly
indicative.
Wasn't exactly quick. So no huge change that you haven't had a response in a couple of weeks there, really. I think it's interesting, actually, even at all, that Mikel and Spain were working with Robert Fulkerson, because at least previously the response and kind of indications were that he worked out of NA, and that there were other people who did organized play out of Europe, and that there was a equivalent of him in Europe. So maybe that kind of gives weight to this concept of an organized play team. But I could never really have told you who that person was supposed to be, and I wonder if that position went away much longer ago, and that was something that got rolled up into what Robert previously did. But yeah, what are we gonna do? But wait and see. If somebody gets a response, from organized play, let us know. If somebody gets a response from somebody new and they give themselves the title of organized play coordinator, then let us know. We will try and be in contact through our role in the London Grand Tournament. We haven't really received any actual direct indication through that ourselves, as far as I'm aware. I don't handle the communication, but I don't believe that we've been told that anything has changed. We're a little uncertain about what's going on. So.
The only other thing that has come up as a result of this, I do believe that the TO that has been talking, one of the TOs anyway, that's been aware of this, that you can email the for this is only really true for the US players out there, the USTOs, that it is possible to email the marketing department with the results of their regionals in order to get that nationals thing sorted. I believe. So there is a communication channel open which you probably will be directed to. Whether or not that's actively directed to off the back of emails you send to organized play, or if it's kind of like someone will pick it up and then send you a message being like, oh, by the way, you need to email these guys, whatever. I don't know.
Yeah.
But there does seem to be a alternative for the US national route and qualifiers. Obviously, if anything happens with that, we'll find out.
Gen Con and US Nationals is what, like
6 weeks away?
8 weeks away?
Yes,
maybe?
Yeah, 8 weeks away, maybe, yeah.
7, 8 weeks away. So, I mean, we really won't wait that long to find out if somebody new is in charge or it's a total disaster, right? Like, like they've taken it on themselves that they are running nationals this year. So either somebody new or like some kind of new coordinator, or like at least somebody will respond to those emails, take up the position and kind of like say what's happening. Or we can sort of ascertain that they are like that organized play is really, really in a bad situation, because if they're going to let their own biggest event that they've ever run and that they've put this work into over the last 6 months just drop at the drop of a hat like that, then that's says that they're really not going to be interested in helping other events down the line, are they? Like, this surely is the thing that they've been working towards, and so if they don't pick it up themselves, then that's going to be quite damning. So we'll find out in a matter of single one hand's worth of weeks whether or not somebody starts making announcements about it.
Yep. I do think West Coast, his comment in chat there is fantastic, in that they've replaced Robert with robots, and they've also announced the Cyberpunk board game coming soon. Coincidence? We think not. So yeah, it's. I mean, it is possible. There is also the possibility, and I do think we should stress this. Organized play, I'm not going to sit here and point fingers and blame people. Organized play has been difficult. As of late, over the last, I'd say 3 to 4 months, I think Robert's been trying to do a good job. More recently, last year it was a lot more difficult. Certainly in the run-up to LGT last year, there was a lot of issues. And it did feel like a lack of communication. But this year does seem to have improved somewhat. And a lot of people have been getting support, and yes, it's been patchy, and yes, there's been some people getting lots, some people not getting much, but at least it's been something. Maybe it is it is a chance that Robert, unfortunately, maybe they want to do something better with it, make it a bigger focus, and so as a result, Robert, unfortunately, just had to be the wayside. Or they're restructuring, they're refiguring out how they want to run it, and that might take some time, and part of that might have been the World Championship lead up, and they think actually we need a better structure for this. And Melkor points out the other piece of news, which ultimately we weren't going to talk about because there isn't any news, which is there's no Facebook chats either. So at this point, the only real public facing member that anybody in the community had public communication with was Robert regarding organized play, and with him disappearing, we no longer have Michael, we no longer have Chanel and Fabio doing these Facebook chats. So the only link that was had is no longer there. 100 and I want to say 120 days, maybe more, since the last Facebook.
It's nervous news. Like it makes me a bit nervous. I'm not. It's not an issue yet, and it could end up being something better. But it makes me nervous about the future of the competitive side of the game. And agree or disagree. And like plenty of people do disagree. I believe that the game cannot continue and cannot thrive without its competitive community. Right? Like, I just believe that it is the driving force that keeps the game alive, keeps the game active, keeps the game moving forward. It takes the few people who are obsessed with the game, who will do anything for the game, who will travel, who will put on events, who will support, who create channels, who talk about the game. It takes those people to keep the community feeling like the game is alive. And if not, then it's no different to a board game, basically. Like, as in, that is, in my mind, the difference between like a tabletop game, a war game, a skirmish game, whatever you want to call them, versus a board game, which is some board games, the wildly popular ones, they do have, like American national championships. They have competitive scenes, but in reality, like, people just pull out a board game and play a board game and then put it back on the shelf. Whereas really what defines a tabletop game is its community, your ability to just turn up in another place and play the game with other people that you've never met before. And that is always going to be reliant on there being a competitive community, in my mind.
To answer Ian's question, when was the last update live chat? In January. It was indeed January 27th, as per UK time. So I'm pretty sure it says 27th in the US as well. It was at 2 p.m. EST in the US on the 27th, which is 130.
The days are mostly the same everywhere in the world, Mickey.
Well, no, not quite, right? Because
January in the UK is January in the US, yes.
Yeah, not January the 27th, because January the 27th, is not the same in Australia, for example, right? It's just nice to give people reference points. But no, it's 130 days ago as of right now, and this episode going live. Charles says competitive Monopoly is the future. That was a really random comment that sparked a memory. Sometimes I put a random video on to listen to when I jump in the shower, as one does sometimes, right? And the random video I put on yesterday, 2 days ago, was teaching an AI how to play Monopoly. Which was,
I've seen that video.
Yeah, it's really, really interesting, actually, about the different ways of strategies that come up. And
the weird strategy that it got itself into, where it felt that it should
buy the Browns.
Not just buy the Browns. It bought every possible property, and then it mortgaged them, or whatever it is. It mortgaged every property it had because for whatever reason it had decided it was a good strategy, and then it ended up in an infinite loop of all the properties on the board were mortgaged, and none of the AIs ever took money off each other. Which further reinforced its own idea that all players won because they all did win or they all lost, whatever.
I tell you what was funny.
Like, it's interesting that you say that because I go on YouTube deep dives sometimes, and somebody's channel that I ended up watching for a little while was a guy who plays incredibly competitive Catan, right? Like, And this is it's a much more stable. Strategic game, right? So like it's the high end of strategy of a board game, but there is a very interesting concept to that, which is that it's a 3 and 4 player game, and so you have a lot of strategy which is totally irrespective of the board game. It's a lot of table strategy around like positioning so that you're not the obvious person to be picked on by the other players. I mean, it is in essence a trading game, and that you could play such a trading game competitively is very interesting. But that just speaks to the fact that Catan is considered to be one of the most successful board games that ever existed, right? And so therefore it can create a competitive community because it is so widely spread, it is so widely played that you can take the tip of the iceberg and there's enough players there to play competitively and to take it very, very seriously. There will be people who take everything into extremes. Every community will have people who take it further than others. Whether or not board games naturally tend towards like having the ability to become competitive games is very much up for debate about whether or not it transitions well. even when you look at 40k, Warhammer, it is wildly successful and therefore allows for a very competitive game, or at least a very competitive community. This is despite the fact that for many, 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 many years, Games Workshop said, this isn't a competitive game and we don't really endorse competitive play, and we do not, and we will not like help you run competitive events. We will help you run narrative events. We will promote the game from a like beer and pretzels perspective, from a fun perspective, from a narrative perspective, but we do not endorse the competitive community in a direct manner. And yet the game was so wildly successful that a very competitive community was able to spring up. It became the ITC, International Tournament Circuit, all these things. They created their own, their own tournament rule sets, their own official. They created their own scenarios, which were separate. They practically had their own rule book. They had their own balance. They had their own everything, right?
Yeah.
And eventually, I do believe that 40k are now eventually, very long process, almost effectively recognize ITC these days. They possibly even work with them, I believe, at last, but that's such a long road, and that's only been allowed to be possible with the way that Games Workshop kind of went very anti-competitive play, because the game was so wildly successful.
Like you're saying, the moment something becomes popular and successful, a competitive system will develop. And this is just human. It's nothing to do any more than human nature, right? Is that we like to see how good people are. Some people don't. Some people don't mind. But competitiveness is just a human trait that we all have, be it in bucket loads or in just small answers. But yeah, it's something that will develop over time, and the strength of that community is down to the strength of the players in it. How well it does and how popular it becomes is down to the people who are pushing it and the people who are trying to make it succeed. Yeah. ITC was announced by GW as the people officially running their competitive events. Yeah, I know that GW.
Well, I mean, I think that's a whole movement to that GW even like are running a competitive event, right? Like by proxy through ITC, but as far as they were always concerned, ITC ran them and they had nothing to do with them. Well, like not that they just didn't endorse it. They don't say this is the US Nationals, right? Like it's similar to this idea that whether or not CMON are running US Nationals and they endorse this person as the national champion, or like the equivalent is more that I am running the LGT Invitational, right? Like there's no endorsement there. CMON won't turn around and say, yes, this person is like European champion or Invitational champion or whatever. Only the community can give that endorsement to that player. Now GW have finally said, yes, ITC are running tournaments on our behalf, and we endorse it as having like XYZ importance on top of whatever importance you already gave it to.
Yeah. The funny thing is, of course, with now chapter approved and stuff, without going into 40k, basically 40k dictate what the competitive scene is like a little bit with their regular updates with chapter approved and stuff like this. They decide what is in and what is out of the competitive scene, basically. And they do that in response to the events that are held and what they want to see on the table and things. So, anyway. It's...
yes, like I say, organized play, it feels like it's such an integral part of an alive, thriving tabletop community. If you are successful, you have a competitive part of your community, and the bigger it is, the more your game will grow. In my opinion, the wider your appeal will be, the more people you will reach. If only because the competitive community represents the peak of the base of the community. Like whether or not your competitive community is the majority of everybody who plays, or just the very top peak. But if you grow that competitive community, you're almost definitely growing the base as well, because it takes a lot of people for there to be one person who's obsessive.
Yeah. Definitely is the case. You know, we've seen that in communities all around the world, really. But ultimately, certainly the UK, France have seen it very much so. Spain has seen it to some extent. The US, I think, is starting to see it now, where you add a strategy system, organized play system, some way of getting to some kind of like event. And you see players come out of the woodwork, and you know the UK has seen that a lot. We've seen, you know, we'll get onto it later on, but we saw like some big events happen in places where events have never happened before, with players that have never attended them, because the game is still growing, because the player base is actually there. It's just pulling it together. On that note, that is kind of the news, really, is the only thing. The other piece of news which I was going to share with everybody here, which, again, doesn't really affect probably most people here, but if you are in the US or if you're Carlo, you might want to know that Las Vegas Open tickets are now on sale. If you're really looking to go to the Las Vegas Open next year, 2023, tickets are available now. You can register. As far as I am aware at this time, there will be an event for A Song of Ice and Fire. That may change, it may not go ahead, but as far as I'm aware, there is going to be one. So yeah, if anyone does want to go, tickets are available now. You can go get them. There you go. On the same note, yeah, go on.
Well, I was just going to say, I really don't think I can make it to LVO. I'm already traveling to the US twice this year, so I really would like to. I've been thinking about it. Like, honestly, it was already on my radar as like, God, could I possibly like manage to go to LVO, you know, and therefore the US 3 times in 12 months? But I think it'll have to wait till 2024 at that point.
Yeah.
We'll see. You know, maybe Carl will convince me.
The next piece of news, which again is actually a relatively short piece of news, for anybody in Europe, the UK in particular, but you know, any of our European friends as well. We are going to get an update on ticket sales tomorrow for the LGT, but essentially we are aware that all tickets are likely to have been sold. We don't get ticket updates literally as they're sold. We get them weekly. So if you haven't got a ticket for the LGT and you're like really wanting to go on the link now, see if you can still buy a ticket. They will sell tickets over the limit. We've told them to do so because it gives us a bit of a backlog in terms of waiting list. Not all 128 players will ever turn up for any event ever. You know, you'll always get. Do we work on like a 10% dropout rate usually? Is what we typically look at. Anyway, gives you an idea.
Who knows?
Who knows?
That's the fun of it.
But yeah,
absolutely go buy a ticket. Like, this is like literally your last chance to buy a ticket. If you don't buy one now, then the only way you're going to get one is if you like message us, join a waiting list, see if somebody drops out, see if somebody wants to transfer their ticket. Because at that point, you know, we are expecting some people need to not turn up. Otherwise, we actually have too many people.
It won't be many. It won't be many, will it? Will there be only a couple?
But yes, go and buy your ticket like now if you want it. If you're unsure, you know, like, and you've really left it to this point and you're still unsure, there is the flexi ticket which you can get back. You know, we'd rather you just didn't. You know what I mean? We'd rather you just were able to commit, but not everybody can. If you really want to, buy your flexi ticket tonight, and you will be able to recoup nearly all of your money back with a small
£10. Is it £10?
Yeah, I think it's 10.
So you can get same majority, and that looks all the way up to 1 week before the event, I believe.
Paul Tellen saying that it's not just us overselling, but I'm pretty sure he oversold for his own event too. So those in glass houses shouldn't throw stones, Paul.
It is true to say that site overselling, it's not massive. It's not like we've got a 128 player event and so we're selling 150 tickets. That's nowhere near it. It's more like there's 128, and is it like 135 or 130? It's something like.
Really, really want to be as close as possible to that 128. We will help people move on tickets if they need to. We felt that with particularly with the flexi ticket that people can return right up until like 1 month before, or possibly even 2 weeks before the event goes live. We really wanted to be able to get as many people there, and we were pretty confident that we won't overspill over the 128, but we want to be as close as possible to that. We absolutely, we're very confident we'll get over 100 on the day, at least. I want to be. Like that gap is really, really important. We want to try and a complete 128 bracket would be an amazing feat, and where we want to be as close as possible to.
It also gives us an element of protection against the European travellers who, them attending is not necessarily like less common or anything like that. But the simple fact of the matter is, if you're travelling further and you're getting planes, you're getting sea transport, whatever like that. Certainly in the UK at the moment, if you've been trying to get flights anywhere over the week holiday, there's been lots of cancellations and things. Not suggesting any of that will happen, but the truth of the matter is if the further you have to travel and the more modes of transport you have to use, the more chance something goes wrong. And if anything gets delayed or someone can't make it, gets cancelled or anything like that, there's a chance that people can't get a replacement in time, or they can't afford it, or whatever it might be. So as a result, just to make people aware.
Generally speaking, it's the people who have to travel the furthest, or oddly enough, the people who travel least far, who are the two people who don't turn up. People who have to travel the furthest, like things come up and it becomes like literally impossible for them to make it there. And then it seems to be that the people who are the closest, like literally they'll be like half an hour away and they don't have to book anything. They don't have to stay there. All they have to do is turn up on the day. They'll get to like the day before and they'll be like, I can't be bothered. And you're just like people are traveling around the world to be here and you can't be bothered to drive down the end of the road, and you're just like mind blown sometimes. But I'm sure there's plenty of things just down the road from me that other people like would go miles to go and see, and I just can't be bothered to go and have a look at.
I mean, that is quite literally true. Anyway, LVO tickets, Song Ice and Fire, London Grand tournament tickets, all available. LGT obviously selling out as of tomorrow is when they're going to close. I think they close tomorrow. So, yes, that's it. After tomorrow, you cannot buy LGT tickets through the website. You will have to wait for a second-hand one or something like that.
That's true. Yeah. I mean, that is almost news. Carl says that UK Games Expo was at the weekend, and there was a banner by On Tabletop, who it turns out used to be called Beast of War. We were all like, who the hell are these people? They had a Song of Ice and Fire banner saying, hey, we do videos and tutorials and these things for this game. And everybody was like, the fuck is that? Because I've never heard of them. But turns out it's Beast of War. And I don't know, like, they must have done some videos at some point, but I guess they've been pretty cold on it for quite a while.
Yeah. It was certainly interesting. Yeah, the weird thing for me, and I think Carlo as well, is that Beasts of War, for those of you that are in the UK, is a name that, to be honest, I would almost argue was almost a household name in the UK in the gaming scene. A lot of people had heard of Beasts of War. They'd done a few things, but yeah, they haven't been heard from, and quite literally, as I was talking to someone the other day, I said, I have no idea who these guys are, and someone said, oh, that's Beasts of War, they rebranded, and I was like, I didn't know Beasts of War had rebranded. So it says a lot. Yeah.
Speaking of, I mean, like.
Anyway.
Just a random thought. Does Miniac still videos for, like, I'm just thinking about people who, like, big household names who came and made a bit of a splash at a time in the song community,
Mm-hmm.
and then, like, does he still post song stuff? Is he still interested in the game, or did he give up on that?
Yeah, I do believe he does. I don't know if he posts videos as much, but he is still interested. He's actually very bizarrely, one of the patrons that we have in stats now is actually from the same community as Miniac, as in, like, in the same place in the US. Knows him, I wouldn't say extremely well, but certainly knows him in person. And I'm led to believe that the Miniac has been very busy. He's got like 5 or even 8 projects on the go at the moment, but he does still turn up to events and he does still play. He's just very busy.
Yeah.
And of course, with someone like Miniac, of course, as much as I would love him to just do song and just constantly do song, he is also.
No, yeah, I mean, like, obviously for him, his content is his income, is his business, is his, and so such a smaller community, like, he's probably done a lot for the game just by publishing at all and saying that he plays it, but like, he can't make his content be popular if people aren't interested in song in a wide enough capacity, really. So yeah,
I do know. I do follow the guy myself. I think can't remember if I paid for Patreon or if I'm a Twitch subscriber. Can't remember, but I know that he's moving office at the moment. Okay. So I don't know if how far along that he is.
Yeah. I mean, it's the same with, like, Duncan Rhodes, in that, like, it's really great that he puts up tutorials for song minis, that he gives them, like, light of day, that shows people how great the mini is, paints it, shows it off, gives it time in the spotlight. But 40K is always going to be where the large majority of his fan base and his subscribers and his paying, like, where his business money, and when it is his full-time work, he has to go towards that, and that's where the large part of his money is going to come from.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Cool. So anyway, there's our fun. There's our kind of like news for the week. There's not really a huge amount of other stuff that we'll cover today in terms of news, aside from tournament stuff, of course, which we'll get to in due course. But we are going to look at some stats as well, and there's one last piece of news I guess we'll talk about, which is Carlo's news. This is where Carlo looks really surprised, and he's like, "Yeah, what news?"
I never know what I'm supposed to be talking about at this point.
No, he doesn't. It's great. I love springing this on him.
Am I getting married?
What?
Am I getting married? Is that
I am. There you go. I am, but you're not. You already are. Why are you getting married again, weirdo? Right. Anyway, married to his computer, polygamist all the way. Right. He's been playing a lot more online.
I have ventured into the online sphere.
Again.
I've gone online to get my ass kicked.
And more importantly, it's not just going online to get his ass kicked. It's the thing that we talked about last week that ended up being a massive discussion in multiple different areas, constantly talking about this. I don't want to talk about it anymore, so I'm not going to say anything on this topic. I'm just going to sit here and nod. But Carlo, clocks for A Song of Ice and Fire.
Oh, right, yeah. I mean, like, I have, interestingly, yeah, I mean, I feel like I have, well, in all things, I always believe, like, practice what you preach, right? Like, and so I'm very interested in the moment in clocks. I haven't actually specifically been, like, leading the conversation of chess clocks, as it were. I've noticed a lot of people have been talking about it, possibly off the back of me saying, like, I'm playing a game with a clock, right? Whereas, as always, in all these things, I believe I'm right. I don't really need other people's opinions on. So, like, there's a lot of, what I mean by that is I think there's a million different opinions on, if you are going to use a clock, how should you use a clock? Whereas, as far as I'm concerned, I've played a game under a clock, I think 5 times now. And I'm pretty comfortable with the way it plays myself. And I think that people make it way, way more complicated than it needs to be, which is personally, I think that the clock doesn't need to swap backwards and forwards very regularly. There is a pretty natural flow to when it does. When a person asks you to wait because they want to make a decision during your turn, then yeah, sure, give it over. I mean, like, I play a card, I'm playing Lannisters. They're like, oh, I might counterplot it or whatever. They say like, oh, wait. I'm like, okay, cool, take as long as you want. But until they say wait, it's always going to be mine. I don't need to say, do you want to play anything and change the clock? When I make an attack, I don't need to click it over to them and say, roll your dice, it's on your time. Like, it really all just like comes out in the wash. I think people will actually, if they play with them, they'll find that they're way simpler than you think that they are if you treat them as simply as possible. I tell you what's interesting. I've played 5 games under a chess clock. I've won 0 of those games. Like, actually 0.
I have to say as well, right?
If you look at my profile, you can see the 5 games. They're all in a row. And interestingly, like, I came to play the 6th game, and like I asked my opponent, "Do you want to use a clock?" And they were like, "No, I'd rather not." And honestly, part of me was like, "Thank fuck!" Like, Jesus Christ, I might win a game. But like, I took it as I take it as a challenge. I think personally, I think that it's really improving me as a player, playing on the clock. Never once have I actually gotten close to timing out, but it's forcing me to make decisions more quickly. It's forcing me to. I always take time after games to address things that I did wrong and think about them. I'm quite an obsessive mindset in that way, and it generates a lot of situations where I've made a mistake, and generates lots of situations where I can think that was wrong because X, Y, Z. And particularly, I've played practically the same list every time as well. The list does have a lot of moving parts, and there's a lot of things going on there, which is like, I'm not 100% convinced by the list. The list is quite complicated. I'm learning the list and the faction at the same time, all these things. But it's really, I would say, accelerated the rate at which I've learned the list, right? Like, first game, I was like, oh shit, I missed X, Y, Z, I missed this, and this. And then next game, I'm like, don't miss them now because I'm like obsessive with like that. Right? It probably cost me the game that I missed 1, 2, 3. And I think that I've enjoyed every game. Like, I've lost every game and I've enjoyed every game, and they've generated situations where I'm like, I made a mistake there and I can be better. I think that it's upping my own gameplay. Like, I've enjoyed them while losing more than a number of games that I played on TTS where I won, because I've won and sat there and been objectively just bored. Like, I'm just like, God, will you please just take your turn? Like, do you know what I mean? Like, and it's not everybody. I just find that like the pace at which the general populace play on TTS, and it's fair, you know what I mean? Like, some people say as well, I've discussed it with some people, like, it is possible that some people are like, oh wow, this is my time, like, I get to play Carlo, I'm gonna really make sure every move is as good as possible. But for me, like, it's just another game. I just want to play, do you know what I mean? And I'm like, why does every game that I play have to take 4 hours because my opponent's like, don't want to fuck up against Carlo? And I'm like, cool. Well, cool. Well, you don't get to play me again because this has been way too slow.
I will say the most interesting thing. So having watched you play, the most interesting thing with the games is that typically you're using more time as well. You're actually using more time than your opponent. And there was a specific game, and I know it's not indicative, but the first one I think you played against Jacob, he even said straight after the game that he felt really pressured into making decisions and he felt rushed. And yet, when I was watching it, I wasn't watching it feeling that there was like critical error mistakes he was making. It felt like he was making decisions and just sticking with it and going with the plan, and then just seeing what happened with it. And yeah, it might not have always been the best decision, but they weren't terrible, you know. And I think that is. I mean, there was a game where I think you finished it in 45 minutes.
Yeah.
Or something. It was like
Yeah.
less maybe.
So this is the interesting thing, which is I've been playing with a clock, 1 hour each person. To me, this simulates what I have been considering implementing for a 1 hour 45-minute tournament round, right? This means that each of us having 1 hour means that we will pretty much have to be able to complete the game within the 1 hour 45. Otherwise, at worst case scenario, one person played for 1 hour and the other person played for 45 minutes. I genuinely believe that in the worst cases, that is a big improvement over what some tournament games are being played under. Or more to the point, they're probably going for 2 hours right now. And I think we see anything from like 1 hour 15 versus 45 through to like 1 hour 20 versus 40. And so I think that is a big step forward. I think that for me personally, as soon as you play under the clock, it really accelerated the start of the game. Things that you really don't believe are like incredibly important decisions, terrain placement, right? I found that we got set up as soon as we put the clock on. We get set up and get into the game 3 to 4 times as quickly as when it's not on. But like that's all just wasted time. There's people just not really like getting going. They're not really making any different decisions. They're not that pressured into like really rushing it.
Mm-hmm.
They're still making the same choice. They just take 4 times as long to do it and make the same choice when they're not on a clock. It accelerates the early rounds to the point where, yes, if you're inexperienced, you can feel rushed. You don't think through everything. But like, do we really have to think for ages about what our first NCU to activate is? No, let's be fair. These games have been resolving themselves within about an hour,
mm-hmm.
an hour and 15, and I think that is incredibly fast for TTS. I really would normally expect a TTS game to take me 2 to 3 hours.
2.5, I was going to say, is like the standard.
Yeah. So. And these games are resolved within the hour, with both players having the majority of their clock left, effectively. Like maybe 35 minutes used to 40 minutes used, or something like that, or less. And I lose for whatever reason. But like I say, like I'm very pro it. I know that some people are scared of it, and I understand that, right? Like it can make people nervous. It can put people under a lot of pressure. But I just think that it improves gameplay a lot. I've had the opinion that the game needs to be faster for years, like literal years. The reason why me and Mickey effectively stopped streaming almost as soon as we started streaming was because we both came to the conclusion. We were some of the first people who Twitch streamed TTS games during the first NRG tournament. And right back then, we had this conversation that like this is unviewable. Like we cannot, even 2 people, we cannot maintain an active stream. We cannot have insightful, useful things to say for the 3.5 hours that these games are going on for. TTS has improved a bit in its playability since then. Not wildly so. Like practically it was all there back then. There are a few things that improve speed now. But the players are, if anything, playing even slower because everybody's learned from each other what things like can be done in terms of checking distances, what can be, how far you can go forward. Some of the really useful kind of like additions to TTS, and I couldn't imagine taking them away. But the ability to recall location and that it is saved at the start of every turn, right, is actually supposed to be a time saver, but it has been one of the biggest time banes on the game in its entirety, because now people believe that they can test everything that they want and then just recall the locations back to where they were. I'm not saying that I don't do that, right? But the reason that I believe the clock should be there is because one person can't play quickly for both people.
Mm-hmm.
And more importantly, if either player is playing slowly, then their opponent is in a massive disadvantage if they don't also slow down and play the same way.
Mm-hmm.
If they don't also take as much crazy level of methodical care in their positioning, crazy levels of thinking through everything and what could possibly happen, then they are just making themselves at a disadvantage for this game. And I think that that's not a good situation to be in. You need to create an incentive structure which says playing quickly is worthwhile. And that worthwhile thing is that, to answer Hope's question, when you get to 1 hour and you have played for 1 hour, you will no longer be able to take any more actions. When it comes to your turn, you will activate and pass, and that is it. It'll go back to your opponent instantly.
Literally, the only thing you do in the entire game is roll defensive dice, basically, and morale tests.
Roll defensive dice. If you still can control an objective, then you will score points for it. That's it.
There's a bit. There is a weird question. There is, can you pass when in melee?
I would say yes. You know, like
it was a rule that was added and has not added anything to the game, I don't think. So.
Yes, that has created that weird situation that you're effectively breaking the rules when you activate and pass. But yes, as far as I'm concerned, sure, come to it. A lot of discussion is being had, and it is right that like the discussion has to hold up to certain, stress testing, shall we call it, or criticisms. It has to be able to manage these things. But people are effectively saying it won't work because, and then giving an incredibly extreme situation. It won't work because what I'm going to do is I'm going to decide that if the game times out, I'm going to win. And so I have 15, 20 minutes left on my clock. So I'm going to sit here for 20 minutes and say, it's still my go. You can't do anything. Now, yes, you can say that is possible. But the point is that is possible in the rules anyway.
Yeah.
Like
you already do that.
Exactly. So the question is are we then really giving like incentive or like social acceptance to a person doing that? I think not. Like if a person did that in front of me, I would ask the TO to come over. I would expect the TO to say, take your go or resign, So if we're going to sit in a gray area where a person's allowed to take a minute longer to make a decision, then these are things that we can't police anyway. I think that people are basically, they're picking holes in the chess clock, which are holes that exist in the game. Not the chess clock hasn't added them. It just highlights that these things currently don't have rules associated with them. Yeah, I mean, I've only played the clock in TTS so far. I intend to play it in person. I think that it will play way better in person because games are faster anyway. I do still get frustrated with TTS a bit. You know what I mean? I'm not like, I do development, and yet I still find some things on TTS like I'm a tech idiot. Like I'm like, why won't my ruler measure? Why won't this thing move?
Oh,
like,
yeah,
why
no.
won't this?
Your ruler not working is definitely a your end problem, and I have no idea why. Like,
yeah, you do it all the time.
yeah, it's really annoying.
But there are also things like on TTS, like people click in the wrong place, ping, 6 models turn up, things like that, right? Like all these little things that TTS has, and it's interesting that they are like TTS problems, effectively in my eyes, not bartenders mods problem.
No,
as in like if TTS, the actual tabletop simulator was better designed, then these things wouldn't exist. But like, hey, bartender can't get around that part.
No.
But anyway, there are certain things in real life games that just play better. The way you play cards, the way you interact with your opponent, even on voice and stuff like that. There's still limitations to the speed at which you can play and indicate, you know what I mean, that you want to do something or not do something. Plus, the tactile feel of the clock will be better than whatever clock I imported into TTS. So I think that I will play it some more, and then, you know, I'll tell the community how I feel about it. But I'm of the opinion that it improves the game, and that I think it would be for the positive of the community to play with one. I will mostly play with one whenever I feel that like it's appropriate or that my opponent is kind of up for it. If my opponent doesn't want to, this isn't a deal breaker for me. I mean, like, I'll play without one, but I am instantly nervous on TTS if somebody's like, I don't want to play with a test clock. I'm like, okay, can we not play for 3 hours though? Because I don't want to play for 3 hours, please. I've asked for looking for game, and I expect to be done in an hour and a half. So I'm instantly like, okay, but please don't take the piss.
Hobbs there, finally need to manage to flip my NC on its head when passing IRL games. That is, I mean, I'm not even going to lie. That happened to me in one particular game, and Carlo will remember a Night's Watch mirror game I played, where I'm not going to say my opponent was slow. I mean, I was probably as equivalently slow at the time, but I think it went for 4 hours or something stupid like that. And were some moves where there would be a 5-minute gap of almost straight silence, and then it would be, I activate my NCU and pass, and it'll be like, why the fuck did I just wait 5 minutes for that? like I've said it before on Tourney Ground, I have literally sat and played a game of A Song of Ice and Fire while completing a jigsaw on the table next to me. Like, that's not a good thing.
I know things have gone bad when I'm like spending most of the time. Here's the monitor right in front of me. It's got TTS. I'm spending most of my time looking at Discord on this monitor, reading a discussion that's happening about something else. That's when I know like this game isn't progressing at a pace that I'm happy with. And I think that's bad because it creates a feedback mechanism of like, then when my opponent finally has their go, I'm like, oh right, yeah, where am I? What's going on? And then like I don't play quickly either because I'm like, right, I forgot even what was happening. What cards do I have? You know, whereas if we both play at like a very active pace, shall we call it, an aggressive pace even, then we're both just being forced into constantly thinking. And when you believe that you're on the clock, you're utilizing your opponent's clock as well as thinking time. When your opponent's having a go, I know that I'm measuring things and stuff like that because like that's measurement time that I don't want to take during my own turn. And so I'm just way more active in the game. I think going back to the whole learning thing, you know what I mean? Like, it was quite interesting going back to the last couple of games that I've played have not been on the clock. It was interesting to then be like, all these things that I got wrong during the clock, I'm really going to make sure that I hit them right these times. I actually still got a rule very significantly wrong against WAP, which was unfortunate, but it's the kind of, like I say, it's a list with a lot of moving parts, and it's now a mistake that I won't make again. I believe that clocks should be implemented. I'd be way more up for a TTS tournament if clocks were involved. I think that it gets around so many of the issues around like, like whether or not you think that it does or doesn't happen, but any kind of coaching or collaboration from your opponent, like that becomes now like a real like time sink. Getting somebody else's opinion on the game and like trying to act out somebody else's idea is going to take you forever. And that was one of the believed parts to some of the most historically incredibly slow games that happened during the TSL. Was like team collusion on what should happen. And so it gets around that idea. It gets around ideas of people just not being as actively interested. It gets around all sorts of stuff. But it does definitely add, particularly for those new to clocks, particularly those newer to the game, particularly those even new to a faction. Like I've myself found that, I mean, it can be hard. It puts you under a more extreme situation when you're not super familiar with your faction and your units and your abilities. It does add pressure. I don't think that it's like the community. Every game in the community should be played under a clock. I mean, every single, I believe, practically every major chess tournament is played under a clock.
It is, yeah.
Pretty much, like there are some, these days, effectively, like chess is played under a clock. When a new person plays casually, of course, the first thing they don't do is pull out a clock and say, right, what time are we playing for? And chess is and can be played without a clock and is a great game without a clock. But there is this acceptance and this realization that at a tournament level, you must play under a clock, because if not, why wouldn't a person take an hour to choose to make a decision?
Well, I mean, chess as well, because it's so formulaic in that, like, there's not really a surprise. I mean, there are surprise moves you don't expect, but that you can't just, like, in a similar way to Song of Ice and Fire, there are a finite number of possibilities. In a Song of Ice and Fire, there are practically infinite, because where a unit moves can be a quarter of an inch difference. But actually, like, in the game, it's either achieving this position of maybe it's like 18 different potential options of states that could be in, be it showing you flank, front, rear, side, showing you charge blocking, not charge blocking, in range of another unit, out of range. All of these various different conditions can be checked, but ultimately the vast majority of moves you're only really checking like 3 or 4 conditions, which means that yes, okay, there's an infinite number of possibilities practicably with that unit, but actually there's probably only about 10 positions or 10 variants on the position that I actually care about that much. And of those, probably 3 of them, 4 of them are the only likely ones, because other ones are like really fucking dumb, where it's like, oh, I'll just turn around and like show my rear to you, your turn. Obviously that's a pointless move. So as a result, like, chess and Song has a somewhat formulaic approach to it in the calculations that you do. The randomness in Song with attacks and stuff makes calculations different, but in terms of what people choose to do, there's a limited number. And in chess, similar kind of thing. And Carlo's right. You can take a chess game and go away, and essentially, the longer you think about it, the better result you'll get. And if you are to play, and there are chess events that do happen over non-time period. They less common now. They do still exist. They used to exist, basically done by Telegram, basically. But essentially, what it ends up being is it's not 2 players playing the game. It's just like Stockfish versus Leela or something like that. Because people are just using chess engines at that point. That's not a problem. Those games have a place. Alpha Zero, these all have various different places to explore the world of chess and these crazy lines that happen. But it's not like Carlo versus Mickey. It's not. So yeah, on the back of that, though, as well, I was going to say, with the length of games, I know Marwin said it in chat, us casting games for 3.5 hours, finding it hard to talk about different things. Yes, we can talk about loads of different stuff here on Tourney Ground, but the difference is that this content, as Carlo may have said previously as well, this content sometimes lacks a bit of direction. But if you're casting a game, you might have 5-minute interludes where you're talking about something else. You can't make the vast majority of a 3.5 to 4 hour piece of content every 5 minutes is talking about a different topic that isn't the game. Because actually, you also get to the position which is where me and Carlo truly struggled.
Because you don't know what's going on in the game anymore.
Well, yeah, you don't know what's going on in the game, hence the overlay, which I have updated now. I've updated all the overlays if I have to use them again. But actually, more than that, we will talk about a particular line of play or a particular thing that people should do. Then they make what me and Carlo would call quite a clear error. And it's like, we've now got 30 minutes of looking at this error, and we're sat here being like, oh, fuck that.
How do we not just sit here and say that's shit?
yeah, exactly. There's only so much we can sit here and go, well, now he needs to do this, which is us basically saying you fucked it, you know.
Yeah. It feels quite hard to not be incredibly judgmental of other people's play, and yet we're doing it without complete information. We don't know what's in the hand. We don't know what's going on. You know, we don't know what kind of things that they're playing for. So I found it really not easy. Big props to those who do it successfully. You know, I know Loki's spent time, you know, really trying to do it. He does well to discuss other things, not get too bogged down in it. Fred gave one of the classic arguments against the clocks, which is just you have to do things in your opponent's turn. Like I say, I personally think that this comes back to this idea that I think people overstate it. What happens in your opponent's turn is minimal. When it's not minimal, it's very clear that it's not minimal, and it becomes your clock. The only thing which repeatedly happens in your opponent's turn is the rolling of dice. And if that is taking significant amounts of time, then that's a problem anyway. If it's taking you that long that you need to flip the clock during a person rolling some defense saves, then we're at the point where, you know, you're having time issues anyway. Like, again, we're just creating... It's not the clock creating an issue. It is the clock has highlighted that an issue already exists.
The thing is, like, we're talking about like the social grace period or whatever. People saying you should add a grace period to chess clocks, change them every trigger or whatever. The thing is, if I was playing against Carlo, I'd be like, oh, I'm doing this. And then if he doesn't say anything, but he just says, wait, sure, I'll turn the time over when he says wait. Because if he wants to think about that decision point, he wants to spend a minute or two into making that decision, because he believes that's important. I've got no problem with that. You know, he can use his time on my turn because I've swapped it over. But ultimately, that's down to the decision making, and that's what that time is for. The vast majority of that time is very rarely execution time. Me and Carlo talked about this when we had the original discussion. Most turns, if you actually think of execution, it's probably only 15 to 20 seconds, maybe 30 seconds of actual stuff that you're doing, active things, you moving things on the board, playing a card and rolling some dice. It probably only takes you 30 seconds to a minute to have complex turns. The truth of the matter is that the majority of the other time is thinking time, you know, and people aren't instantaneous with the way. They don't just go, right, I'm going to move this here and do this. They'll go, right, I'm going to move this, and then I'll move up 5 inches. They're not being as quick as they can be because they know they've got time, and that's not a problem. That's not wasting time. But in terms of the actual physical side of like how much time did you use doing that move versus how much time was necessary, there is a difference. But yeah, it's not a problem at all. And if it is a problem, like I know that, for example, like somebody, if you do like a sentinel off the back of an attack, you just go, oh, right, well, you're doing a charge now. Do you want to just put the time on yours? You know, you're doing a maneuver.
No, I mean, like, to me, if a person starts to make a move, then it's their go.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? Like, it's on their time.
Yeah.
You play, and now his watch is ended, and you're taking an action inside of my go, then I'm flipping the time, right? Like, if you're going to move a model, then I'm going to do it. If you're going to make a full attack, then I'm going to flip it. You're doing Fury for the Fallen, a charge, like nested actions within the other person's turn, absolutely flip over. Even nested responses of like, I activate NCU, and then you're like, I'm like, okay, think as long as you want. And then if anything, that like actively makes you make a decision, right? as soon as you know that you're on your own time and that you're not just saying, can I think about this, please? Then you're just going to progress the game better. I'm not, like I've thought about this for a long time, in that I do think that it's much more of a bane in TTS than I think it is in real life play. Though I don't think it's absent from real life play. And I think that it would be positive for the community to try it out and get on board, and and give it a go. Like I think don't shit on it until you've tried it, and you have to try it with an open mind. If you're an incredibly slow player and your opponent is too, then sure, start at 1 hour 15, start at 1 hour, hour and a half, and just understand how the clock makes you feel about the game and think about the game, and find out how long it takes you to play. You don't even have to. Here's the real thing. You don't do clock people at an hour and then say, right, you've lost, or right, you can't take any more actions. I think if you have any small issues with speed of gameplay, then you should be playing under a clock with possibly no ramifications off the back of it. At the very least, you then acknowledge the fact that you are playing at a X pace, which, if it turns out, is 2 to 3 times slower than your opponent, then I would just say, that's not right, that's not fair, you are not a good player. And end of discussion, right? Like, if you have won the game and you took 3 times as long to play the game as your opponent, then it's entirely questionable whether or not you are better than your opponent. Unless your opponent is just like literally throwing models around, in which case, well, like you can't do anything about the fact that they played unreasonably quickly. But I don't think.
The only thing I like about it, and the suggestion you make, Carlo, especially when we talk about tournament rounds and things, is that it doesn't actually necessarily incentivize the games resolving, although we should want games to resolve. I think everyone wants games to resolve. But ultimately, if both players are playing at roughly the same speed, then the game will either resolve or it won't resolve. It doesn't change the results of a normal event if both players happen to be slow. It's actually the case is when both players are not equal in their time usage. And I think that's the thing. Like, if both players happen to be slow players, then, who cares if they don't finish round 3 by the end of an hour and 3/4? If they both are happy with the speed at which they played the game, and neither of them comes away and say, you played slow or I played too slow or whatever, then what's the problem? Yes, they might acknowledge I need to get faster. Me and Carlo can probably attest to that ourselves. We probably play games too slowly sometimes. We can say we need to get faster. But if our opponent is happy that they had around 50%, maybe 60-40 at the worst case, of the game, then who does it matter? But yeah, obviously we won't.
I think the issue is that if you're slow, there is zero incentive to be faster. There is no incentive. You will play worse as you play faster. I've found that when I'm playing under a clock and I'm playing faster, I am worse, straight up. I've lost 5 games in a row. And so there is no incentive for me to speed up. If anything, the incentive is for me to play slower. And that's not a good situation for us to be in.
No. Anyway, on from chess clocks. So that's where they'll be used, and maybe it's how they'll be tested. While we get attacked by yet another bot. You'll be glad to know, guys, that the bots today. I'm pretty impressed, right? This is not the same bot. This is actually multiple different bots attacking us today, leaving us some lovely, nice messages in the chat. We have actually got moderation sorted now, so it is fine. They all disappear eventually. But unfortunately, you have to put up with it. But I'm very impressed. This is now, I think, the 8th different one that's visited us today. Anyway, on with the next kind of feature. And it is still about Carlo, but it's not really news.
The show's about me, so why wouldn't it be?
The show is about you, Carlo. or is it your product, your spawn, the website? You've been playing a lot of Greyjoys, Carlo. I picked up Dagmar yesterday and played a 9 activation Dagmar, similar to what you've been running yourself. I'm not expecting any massive insights, but last week I gave some very detailed insights on Starks. It ended up being. Just very quickly, give us some insights into what you find with Greyjoys.
They're hard.
Could have told you that one, mate. That's not hard. Look, they're bad. That means they're hard, right? That's how it works.
Yeah, I mean, there's a reason why they're one of the last factions that I've come round to. It doesn't fit my play style. I'm not an aggressive player, and I feel like the Greyjoys. There are some people who are playing them differently, and I am watching the way they play, but I'm not. You know, some people are playing them as like a very healing, sustained faction. I just don't see it myself. I'm struggling with their deck a fair bit. I find that every card has a place very similar to the Lannister deck, in that every card has a place, but I'm holding the cards at the wrong time, thinking, oh, that has a nice use, whereas I don't have its current exact use right now, and then I end up getting to like the third, fourth round, and I realize that I've barely seen any of my deck because I just haven't gone through it. I've possibly turned a corner, or possibly just got a bit lucky in my last couple of games. You know, I've been playing on TTS against some pretty high quality opponents who have pushed the flaws in the gameplays that I've been playing. I've been trying to get very comfortable with the faction. I don't know whether or not I'm willing to take it to Gen Con or not. I'm that uncertain about it. There's never been another faction that like I've started playing and I've instantly been like, I can't play this at the next tournament. You know, like, admittedly, I've never. Gen Con's the first one where I like really care about where I come, because there won't be just like the next event to try it at. So, but you know, I think I am possibly turning a corner, possibly getting a bit better with them, possibly it's starting to play out a bit differently. I think I've changed my mindset about the way the list plays and playing it a bit more methodical, a bit more the way I play, a bit more reactionary, a bit slower, and finding that I'm like really playing for the fourth turn, the fifth turn of the game, whereas before I was rushing the game. I felt like I had to make a play right at the start. And I think that personally for me, the way I think about the game in general, I think that the mindset you have coming into any given matchup, and why I think the list building is so important, is that if you come into the matchup with a very specific mindset of like, this is what I want to do in this pairing against your list, this is what I want to exploit and this is what I want to avoid, then you will play way better than if you like just let the game plan unfold upon you, because that's just letting your opponent do whatever they want. Problem was that I felt that I didn't really know what I wanted to do into so many different lists. I just had this idea that I had this singular plan which revolved around Vic Reavers just like killing stuff. And so like the first time that I felt like there was a sniff of an opportunity that Vic Reavers could kill stuff, I'd be like, gotta go for it. This is the time. And then it wouldn't quite pan out. And I'd be like, shit, I have no plan B. And I didn't really think through whether or not the thing I'm killing is the right thing. It was just, I went to kill the first thing that you offered me, first thing that you put in my face. And if you're a good player, the first thing that you offered me is not the thing that I want to kill. I would say, surprisingly, I had more success against some of the strongest things. I felt that I was personally doing pretty well into Free Folk. You know, like, I had a plan. I knew the matchup well. I had a plan into that. even into Night's Watch, I didn't like it as much, but I sort of had a plan of what would happen. I was very happy with the Drogo Targaryen kind of matchups. And then suddenly what I realized was that I had this game plan for all these lists that I knew. And then things like Lannister Red Cloaks and Starks were suddenly like, I was just like, I have not thought through this matchup. Like, I do not know how I'm supposed to win against this. I don't even know which list to pick. And so I'm just going to like default to the one that I'm sort of like more comfortable with. And it was quite an interesting revelation that, again, I think it comes back to this idea that, like, I think for a lot of people, that's a lot of the way they play the game. Like they're just, every time they come into a matchup, a faction, they're like, oh, I don't know what's going to happen. Whereas the thing in the past that I've always been best at is like, I can plan most of the game out before it even lands on the table, just when I look at the lists in theory. But I was coming at the game from such a different approach that I was finding Greyjoys a real struggle.
Do you think, I was just interject, but do you think that somewhat that is warped, or the play and the list building and perhaps the way you think about the game? And I think this has got an element of truth to this regardless, but it's warped around your kind of like standard opponent, and with you playing a lot on physically, you know what the meta stuff is, and you obviously prepare for meta. So we're talking Night's Watch, Targ, to some extent Baratheon, and obviously Free Folk. You're playing, physically against a lot of, you play against my Free Folk a lot. You play against Dan's Starks somewhat, but slightly less so. And he typically doesn't favour the kind of Stark lists we're seeing more commonly now. And you don't play against Lannisters. You don't play against Greyjoys at all. And you're coming back from like a Targ perspective. You've just come off the back of playing Targ a lot, so you're probably still thinking about them kind of subconsciously. You are, your second faction arguably is Baratheon, so you're still thinking about them a little bit. Do you think it is ultimately the meta, if you want to call it that, and your usual opponents, your meta, is shifting the way that you think about the game? And as a result, you're actually struggling when you're seeing things that aren't exactly what you expect.
Yeah, there's definite truth to that. I think that one of the reasons why I'm struggling with Greyjoys more than anything else is that I've almost never interacted with Greyjoys. I've almost never played against Greyjoys. It's not just that I'm new to the faction playing it. I'm new to the faction as an opponent, right? Like, I've watched Mikael play Greyjoys before, but like effectively, I've played against Greyjoys before I started playing in them. I've played against Greyjoys in a tournament once, ever. Like, I met them once in Scotland, right? Like, and I played against them. And honestly, I was just a bit like, let's see what happens. Like, I'm pretty sure that if I just like attack stuff, then it will die.
I'll ram Drogo at them. Just go.
Yes. I was playing Drogo. I was just like, I just slammed Drogo down his throat, and it'll probably play out fine, right?
High level strategy there.
Yeah, but honestly, like, I had no idea what was going on. I wasn't thinking, God, this is going to counter me. XYZ is going to counter me. Like, I definitely probably didn't give enough respect to like the importance of we do not sow and whether or not bags is claimed and all these kind of things, right? So I feel like I'm coming at this faction from a much lower level than I've come at a lot of other factions. I came Lannisters, my faction from the start, going out. Night's Watch had tons of experience playing against and with, very easy transition into them. I also just think that they're a very simple faction to play, very straightforward. You can't go that wrong. Baratheons, I mean, they're just, once upon a time, they were poor man's Lannisters, and now they're just Lannisters in a different color. Lannisters that have real panic damage these days, so that bit was not hard at all. Targs are so widely played, and I'd like seen so much Targs that, again, it was a bit of a change in pace for me. It was not the style that I'm used to. I was going to force myself into a very aggressive play style, which I still never been that comfortable with. but I kind of I found my way with the faction, and that bit kind of came together eventually. I feel I understand the faction way better now. And Greyjoys, though, as much as I'm interested in them, one of the reasons that I am interested in them is that I don't think that there is an established Greyjoy meta. Interestingly, coming back to your point about meta, like, I do think that, like, the number of things that you should expect to see at any given time is wider than it ever has been, right? Like, the number of things that you have to be ready to face, the number of things that you need to be expecting are so wide, right from, like, 6 activation Baratheons with Champion Stag, through to Baratheons with panic damage, through to Lannister Red Cloaks are still alive and well, it turns out, through to Starks playing a 9 activation spam, through to Starks playing like more elites, Tully Cavaliers. Like, every faction can at least throw like a couple of looks at you, and 6 of them are viable.
Yep.
Maybe 7 of them are viable. And I do think that Greyjoys are a struggle for me particularly. But my mindset with them is starting to change. And I always believe that mindset coming into the game is one of the most important things.
Yeah.
I've learned from each of my losses, and I have a new perspective on the matchup. There are some things that I'm quite scared of still. I still wouldn't want to play the matchup again, and that may make me change my list slightly. New list looks. If there's ever a matchup out there that you are just desperately hoping that you never face it in a tournament, then either you're rolling the dice or your lists are wrong. That is just my opinion of the way people build lists and should be building lists. If you're like, oh, well, if this comes up, then I'm just going to lose. It's like,
then why running that combo of lists?
Change your list then. Yeah, like, there is no thing outside of neutrals, which maybe we'll come to. There's no thing outside of neutrals where you should just write off entire factions as bad matchups that you can't win. There's always a plan. Possibly the problem has been, though, that I have been planning too much for the things that I consider the top end, or maybe just the things that I see the most. As you discussed, there's more my local, like, meta, for the word of, like, what I need. Be it tournaments, be it casual gameplay. I've planned too much for them and lent too far into that and too far away from general purpose lists, just generally powerful cards and combos and units. Because there is a difference between a lot of the skews that you see and just generally good stuff. Like, they're not the overlap isn't necessarily that large.
Yeah. I just curious question, right, Carlo? Because you probably see it on the screen, but a lot of people might be maybe not surprised if they're used to seeing the site and things like that. A mainstay of lists, as we know, anyone who's seen Greyjoys played, Vic Reavers, one of the most popular combos in the game, pretty much. Reavers for Greyjoy are the worst unit. The worst unit by stats. And
yeah, I mean, I think that 7 morale is just so harsh in this game.
Yeah.
7 morale is just coming into that mindset about a matchup. There are so many matchups where as soon as your opponent sees a 7 morale unit, and I don't care that it only costs you 5 points, they see a 7 morale unit and they think, munch, that unit is going to die. All I have to do is throw some panic tests its way. Against Lannisters, it becomes an absolute healing factory. From High Sparrow against Melisandre, it just becomes a 2-shot potential absolute kill. Against all sorts of stuff, it becomes not your strength, but it becomes your weakness. And so, yeah, I am using Reavers. They're not spammable. I don't believe. Nobody's. People postulated this idea of like a 5 or 6 Reaver spam list, that they were this good, and like, no, that never came to fruition. That is not strong. Similar to possibly because they play a lot of Dagmare, so he obviously has coordination tactics. But similar to Free Folk, I do believe that Greyjoys are something of a toolbox in that they are at their best when you are bringing lots of different abilities to the table, and being able to offer lots of different threats. But that's much, much more complex than having one unit that you know really well and just putting it in every situation. You have to get that unit into the right situation, because for every strength that it has a weakness. And if your weakness is going to be your low defense, low morale, then you better be the one hitting first. If your strength is your absolute survivability of the best known unit of Silence Men, particularly put Blind Baron on them, stick Baylor in them, that unit is nigh unkillable. If you can't get it up front and center doing enough damage, then that's worthless, because your opponent's just going to tie them up, move away from them, and focus down everything else. Baylor doesn't really support the rest of his list very well. And so, like you have to learn how to use each of these individual pieces to their best. And there's a lot of complicated moving pieces. And so hopefully I'll get to understand them all and get some good results soon.
I have to admit, MCXL in chat saying that, backing up with the lots of moving pieces, they are worse than Free Folk. They have a much the deck. While I don't think the deck is bad, it's not great. It doesn't have nice triggers that you want to use. Well, the funny thing with the Greyjoy deck, when I've played it, is that if you get the right combo of cards come up, you can have these very swingy self-buff effects. Not enemy damage, which is more common with other decks, but you get these very strange moments where it's like, yeah, I was on one rank and now I'm full health and I'm fine. But
yeah,
you're not doing more damage with that necessarily, and it's about how do you translate that into damage or effective board control. And I think he's very right in saying that the way you build, certainly with Dagmar, I think less with other commanders, but Greyjoys for me, if you're running Dagmar, it felt, literally played this yesterday, felt like I was running a Free Folk list, and I was picking units and attachments in the way that I think and the way I play Free Folk, with just a slightly lower curve. I don't think I'll straight up say this, which people do not have nearly enough respect for. House Harlaw Reapers, who are bad, right? They're not a good unit. No, they are bad. They're a bad unit, right? People shouldn't just park that thing because it's not good. Because having access.
You all but lost that game against WAP until you Hail Married a one-rank kill on Flayed Men.
No, that's not it. That's not.
And you lost because that unit is dog shit. And then you won because that unit got the most fucking god roll you've ever. You can't assign value to the most random fucking thing that. No. You are not telling me how Carlo Reapers are good.
No.
I watched that game. They were god awful.
I will not say that game is the reason they're dog shit, because that's not the game they're designed for, right? I got lucky. That's simple as that. The point is, though, is that they offered me a tool that I didn't like in that particular matchup, the matchup that you had played as well. And the big thing for me was that it offered me a tool which I think worked in other matchups, that I felt comfortable would have helped in other matchups, just not in that particular game.
It is possible that I'm just overlooking them,
But my point is, and this comes back to a lot of things, right? And this is just looking at the way we look at games, right? War Mammoths are one of the worst things that Free Folk can run. And yet I think, people win events with War Mammoths. War Mammoths have a place. I do think that they're not as bad as it would suggest, as long as you're building with the right thing in mind. You could say it's a lot of units in the game. Less so with Night's Watch. Ranger Hunters are clearly the only thing that works. But
I
conscripts
mean,
are...
the thing that Jacob's been doing recently with Kevin's Mountains Men
Yeah.
has, but it works. In my mind, it works because your opponent is expecting them to be shit and doesn't give them enough respect. And then when it turns out that they do, the game is well enough balanced that this unit costs this much, roughly speaking,
Yep.
costs this much because it has some abilities that make it worth that much. The thing is that those abilities are some of the most easily avoided abilities in the game.
Yep.
But if you look at the unit and just go, that thing's shit, and ignore those abilities entirely and walk into them, then you will fall foul of that unit and be like, oh shit, that thing actually can do these things. And both of those cases are an opponent allowing their opponent to gain the most of their pretty questionably good unit. Like, very questionable whether or not that unit ever gets its value back if your opponent doesn't just allow you to. And this is very true of so many units that more casual gameplay, they're like, why don't people respect this unit? It's really, really good. And you're like, those abilities are very easy to work around if you understand their limitations, and they're costed a bit high because when they do work, they're very powerful. But when they're avoided, that's not really going to affect your opponent's game plan at all, and it just becomes a bad unit.
Champions of the Stag, I think, are a classic example of that, in my opinion, in that I think for 8 points, Champions of the Stag aren't bad. But the vast majority of players will look at Champions of the Stag and say, oh, I want a unit of them, they would be great on the board and things like that. I am genuinely of the opinion that when we're talking, at this point, very high-level play or very competitive play, I feel fine if my opponent's got Champions of the Stag on the board. I genuinely feel good. I think it's an 8-point investment that's so abusable with the mechanics of the game. I'm not suggesting that there's better options, but I do believe it's abusable, and yet it's one of the highest rated Baratheon units out there. We talk about skew lists, right? We talk about stuff that does well competitively versus not. We see Melisandre, and again coming up as one of the best things in the game for Baratheons, and yet I'm not that bothered when my opponent has Mel, really. I accept the casino nature.
Generally speaking, you play, I mean, I know not exclusively, but generally speaking, you play a 5+ morale rally point army that has 4-point infantry, right?
Oh yeah, but
not a good matchup for Mel, and that's not a good matchup for Champions of the Stag. Mm-hmm. Personally, I believe that both of those units have great value, and that they've been buffed to the point where, mostly with Champions of the Stag, they also have these abilities where if you allow them to be, they are just going to ruin your entire game.
Yes.
But even when being worked around, I still think that Champions of the Stag are a pretty good efficiency unit these days.
Maybe.
I think now with their most current buffs, their most current position, that they are just a good value 8-point unit particularly with the way that the Barra deck works now. And also with Melisandre, I think that Melisandre is actually just a great value 5-point NCU. I think that people are building into Melisandre, Jaqen, Roose, this, that, blah, 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 blah. And yes, you've gone too far down the path.
Yeah.
Because Melisandre by herself is just a good value 5-point NCU, especially when paired with Stannis for Stalwart, when paired with Queen's Men, or have an incredibly reliable unit to use it on, or maybe with R'hllor Faithful or something like that, so that you can generate tokens.
Yeah.
Even the fact that she's just a 5-point NCU that just gave out Vicious and the R'hllor keyword is actually not that bad, and then throw in the tests as and when you want to on top, and I think that she can really affect the game and be very positive. I don't think that this, personally, I don't think that this is the stats misrepresenting something that people are just letting win because they don't know how to play into it. I think that Mel's just a very good NCU. And personally, I think that Champions of the Stag are just a very good unit these days. I would personally be pretty torn between them or Flayed Men in my barras.
That's fair enough.
And everybody knows that Flayed Men be considered still a very good 8-point unit choice.
Yeah. So coming in at number 12 in the unit choice list, Champions of Stag, arguably best unit in the game by ranking points. I don't see it. I personally don't believe they are. It might be the factions that I play. Might be the way I think about the game. I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong, but I don't view them as powerful as this would suggest. But yeah, it's always interesting, right? It's the stats. I disagree with the stats. That doesn't mean the stats are wrong. It most likely means that I'm wrong. But it's game perception. Because there are other units on there that we look at and go, yeah, I can make sense of that. Example there, Giants being bad for Free Folk. That makes sense. Veterans of the Watch being bad for Night's Watch. Yeah, I can see why that might be the case. Because there are just simply better 7-point options out there. But it's interesting, it is just interesting, maybe. Yeah. There's other ones on there that I do agree with massively. Conscript's not pulling their weight either. Suffering.
I'll let you know if I figure Greyjoys out, but
yeah,
they still remain an enigma to me.
Yeah, no, they're definitely they're interesting. What I do think is interesting with Greyjoys might just be me. I'm very tempted to try very different, not I won't say builds, but very different things in Greyjoy. And it might just be because I'm less experienced or whatever with them. But for me, I'm finding that list building is actually interesting with them.
Yeah.
And that might just be because they're not shackled to a list archetype, or I don't believe that they're shackled to a list archetype, which is actually part of the thing. People say that building lists with free folk is fun. I don't think it is, because I feel shackled to an archetype now, rather than building lists because I can.
So I do believe, generally speaking, whenever a competitive player feels like they're not shackled to a particular competitive build, the faction's just not very competitive.
Yes. Yeah.
Like, because a truly competitive build doesn't exist, and you can dance around with ideas that hopefully catch people off guard. Hopefully people haven't seen it before. Hopefully somebody will fall into a trap and make a mistake because they haven't seen it before. But the reality is that when it all comes out in the wash, as it were, they're just not that reliably powerful.
Completely agree.
And that the same meta-defining lists come up again and again and continue to win tournaments, despite the fact that they are well known, despite the fact that people know all the tricks that they have, because they're just good, right?
Yeah.
Once a list is known and widely known, and people have practiced against it, and yet it still wins, that's because it's actually genuinely powerful. And if you're playing off meta, then part of your value is that you are unknown, lesser played against, can catch people off guard. But once that's gone, then chances are there isn't loads left for you.
Yeah, that's I would say that's true. Certainly the more you play a faction, certainly the more competitive it becomes, the more constrained you believe the builds get, because you're arguing over 1 or 2 points of difference, and understanding what those 1 or 2 points of difference actually are in the list, rather than when you're less constrained, I just change this entire 10-point section of the list out and it doesn't really matter that much. Yeah, I do agree there completely. The May stats are out. I just thought I'd load up the Reavers and Reapers because the conversation was around that. And you can look at that fantastic win rate, 42% for Reavers, 26% for Reapers. So don't run Reapers, they're bad. Pick rate, 103%. Now, people are going to be like, "Oh, it can't be 103%." Can be, because it's about how many lists they appear in, and if they're appearing in, on average, more than one per list, it will be over 100%. That's how that works.
Individual units, they vary a little bit more, but
Yeah.
as I was saying earlier on, I think that it's very interesting that like that range of use
Mhm.
only really spreads from 90 to 110, right? There's
Yeah.
either 0.9 or 1.1 Reaver units in a list. Now,
Mhm.
if you look specifically back at, just back at the Reavers
Yep.
earlier in 2021, like that's a noticeable decline from the fact that they used to be 1.3 per list. The difference between the highest they've ever been in season one versus what their average was in 2021 is bigger than the difference that we see between any 2 months. Now, most commanders, they're sitting more like, popular commanders are sitting at like 15% usage within their faction, roughly speaking, right? Like not the super, super, super popular ones. Honestly, they'll only vary. Like some months it's 14%, some months it's 16%. The pick rate of these things is incredibly consistent, and yet there are enough people submitting that this isn't individual personal preferences. This is just like the usage by the community is very, very consistent.
Mhm.
And I find it very, very interesting. It effectively means that like there is a lot of consensus around what people like to use, whether they believe that they're building competitively or not. And it is well known what people think are bad units when you see that Reavers, they only appear in like 1 in 4 units.
Mhm. Yeah. Interestingly, to see Mant's win rate did actually relatively skyrocket in May.
While his pick rate suddenly suffered a drop.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, maybe May, that's a very significant change for May there. What we saw was 40, 43, 44,
Yeah.
41, and then suddenly it's down to 30. Be that because of all our rhetoric that
It's too good.
Mance is overpicked and he defines the faction, or whether or not it's because, differing events, differing metas, differing whatevers being run.
Mhm. I mean, it'll be
There is a possibility that not all the results are being represented there. I need to look into something. One of the Patreons did have a look and like manually check up some results and then say that they weren't quite being all represented. There are a lot of results that are discounted for various reasons, but I will go in and have a look and see, manually count them up myself and see if something's getting lost. It is interesting that there seemed to be a large decline in the number of submissions from March through to April and then May. Little uptake again in May. It's possible that some of the results are just being lost for some reason in those stats. Either that, or like people. Again, whether we consider stats to be the whole community or just like a tip of the iceberg of the community, or whether or not usage of stats is as closely related as to playing of the game. My first indications were that people are not submitting and therefore not playing as much in the last couple of months as they were in the first couple of months of the season one updates, and I think that is normal. I think that new changes, new additions to the game create a lot of interest and excitement and play. And that comes back to the whole idea that I believe that like continual active management of the game is required.
Mm-hmm. The actual interesting thing is, having just looked at all the faction stats there, anyone watching live, you'll have noticed that there has been an uptick in the number of submissions for basically every faction. 2 factions, actually, which is the most interesting. 2 factions that have not seen an uptick at all are Starks, who have been almost solidly the same. I mean, we see a 2-game variance, which 2 games is neither here nor there. 20 games is something where we can say there's a slight change. 2 games is quite literally like nothing. That could be a game that's played on Sunday before the end of the month. Could have been played on Monday, right? But, and neutrals is the other one that has dropped, which is very funny because one of the things we were going to talk about, is Steve playing neutrals more. We saw Tom Tyler picking up neutrals, playing them in events and stuff, which the vast majority of happened in May. And yet the number of submissions is actually going down when players are picking them up. That in itself is very interesting, because it means that more people are leaving them. But yeah, the other factions, though, on the most part, have seen an uptick, which is good. Baratheons with basically no change, which is the most interesting. Probably shows you that all them people who play Baratheons are still just playing Baratheons.
They're consistently one of the most popular factions. I mean, that like 18%, like 1 in 5 games are Baratheons. There are 8 faction guys, or at least 7.
Yeah.
So 1 in 5 games of Baratheons shows you that they are very popular. But I mean, again, that consistency of 18, 18, 18, 20, 18 just shows you that like Baratheons get played no matter what, like month to month. Like we always see the same stuff.
Yeah.
But again, I find it so interesting that is a step up from 15 point something in 2021 when they just weren't as good, right?
Yeah.
And maybe I'm flogging a dead horse here, but I think that people really believe that they don't care about how powerful a faction is when they do. Like people do. Like they play a faction because they believe it's powerful.
I would probably say that some people don't, but I would say that 20 to 30% of the player base at least definitely do. At least, and that's a minimum estimate. There's probably a lot more that do. But yeah, I mean, Night's Watch we see as an uptick pick rate as well. And, as is what seems to be very common, what happens when you increase the play rate of something? It typically drops in win rate. It's basically true of everyone, right? And you lower the play rate of something, and it increases the win rate. Except here, where we've got an increased pick rate and an increased win rate with Free Folk, which does indicate
easy faction.
Easy faction.
Pick up.
Easy. Yeah. Well, I'd actually argue more than that. Just good.
Easy jobs.
Not easy. Just good. It probably is the best faction.
I always argue that it means the same thing.
Fair enough. I prefer using good rather than easy, but yeah.
Easy is good. Good is easy.
Good, yeah. Yeah, I think that clearly Free Folk are the best faction right now.
There were a few questions. Nathan. So on the win rate as well as the pick rate, it's classified. If a unit appears twice in a game, it counts as 2 wins or 2 losses to its own stats. So it's not just a was I there and did I win the game. If you spam something 5 times over and it wins, then that is 5 counts of it winning and 5 counts of it losing. You can do whatever you want with that information. That is to say, like, I don't have a hugely strong opinion. It was actually just, in a lot of ways, it's easier to code that way. It just goes through and it doesn't like have some kind of thing where it's like, does this exist? Can I do it? Just every time it sees it, it just adds one on. And Matthew, yeah, I mean, like it is an interesting question, which I don't think we'll ever have the answer to, which is what reporting to a Song of Ice and Fire stats represents in terms of like actual play rate to the community. I believe that there's probably a double compounding kind of effect, which is that I believe that when new stuff comes out, I think that there is an all-time high of interest and also an all-time high in interest in the game, all-time high interest in playing and a play rate, and an all-time high interest in reporting to the site. That people are very interested and excited to help generate our first opinions of things. And then, even though they may continue to play throughout the edition, their interest in kind of submitting starts to wane a little, and they possibly stop submitting their games even though they continue to play them, because as far as they're concerned, consensus has been reached and like the site has done maybe what they want it to do, which is it's come to some rough consensus as to what's powerful and what's not powerful. Mm-hmm. That is assuming that's what they use the site for, why they submit, why they participate. that is just a theory in my own head. So I believe that the site probably exacerbates any kind of long-term kind of stagnation of the game, because stagnation of the game can mean stagnation of submission bias, right? Like, or an increase in submission bias towards people not caring to submit because they believe it's stagnant. So why submit? When they believe that the game is in flux, that's when they believe that stats is of most value, because it will help them ascertain what is powerful and what's not powerful. It'll help them understand the game better when they don't know enough about the game. Mm-hmm. That's my theories. That's my opinion. I do believe that there is an element of reality of the amount of submissions. And we do go a decent way to remove reporting bias in some capacities, simply because of the way games are effectively submitted by contract between two players before the game even begins. A huge amount of reporting bias. We would really, really be talking about reporting bias if a person could just submit a game without their opponent ever verifying. If a person submitted games after games were played, then we would obviously be really concerned with reporting bias of loads of people who just submit their wins and don't submit their losses. But because of the way that we hopefully create this, or at least the way I want it to be used, the way I want people to perceive it, is that we create this social contract that this is a game that is reported no matter what comes out of the game. Whether I win, lose, resign, good game, weird dice, whatever, we're not going to discount anything that happens as like, oh, it was really fluky, so we won't submit, or this, we played the rules wrong, so we won't submit. Like, effectively, like, we've made this contract that we will try and play the game to the best of our ability when we send each other a challenge, and therefore we carry on regardless, and any like small amounts of problems that might have come up don't invalidate like the whole swathe of results, in my opinion. Like, they all kind of fall out in the wash, as I've already said today. But yeah, that's my opinion, and that would hugely get around large amounts of issues around reporting bias. There would still be reporting bias around the people who choose to use the site at all, which is probably, a subset, a certain Venn diagram of the players of the game, probably leaning towards competitive, probably leaning towards community and tech aware people, rather than people who play in very isolated manner or in like just on the tabletop of their kitchen table, for example. Mm-hmm. Those people are less likely to be on the Facebook group, less likely to be watching YouTube channels about it, less likely to be looking for a website which provides information about the game, and so we're far less likely to see those submissions.
Mm-hmm. We have just as an update for those who's watching, we have seen an uptick in the number of Mother Dragons games played, back to what we saw in the February and March. Return to.
I mean, that's not even statistical significance.
No, it's not. But what is interesting is that the win rate at 13 games this month, at about 40%, is probably what more people would have liked to have seen and thought, that makes more sense. It is actually a statistical anomaly of all the months that it's that low. We still need more Mother Dragon games to really deem anything from it. So, hey, it got some more play though,
Oh, this was a requested feature. I forgot that I even changed it.
Yeah.
It used to show 5 games, and now it shows 50.
Yeah.
There you go. That graph now is less stupid.
I was going to say,
it's still not perfect.
It was fucking stupid at 5 games. It was like, great. I've seen a grand change of like 5 yellow. Great stuff.
and now you get back 50 results.
Yeah.
I kept an eye on like kind of like the site usage and the API usage, and I thought we could stretch the boat out. We got a few new Patreons, and we upped that little number to 50.
Just a factor of 10, just straight in there.
Yeah.
5 was. I'm not going to say it was useless.
Low. I needed to see what effect it had on the API usage more than I needed it to be that low.
It was a bit useless though. But yeah, no, that's cool. So there you go, 50 submissions. Yeah. Anything else that we wanted to look at? Oh yeah, Drogo. Interesting thing, Drogo. It's the first time that Drogo's dropped significantly since 2021 in terms of his pick rate, which is interesting. People actually finally moving away from Drogo a little bit. He's only half of lists now, which is still ridiculous. But yeah, it's good to see Drogo drop. I do think we want to see more experimentation with Targs on the other commanders, because I'm not saying that they can be competitive, but we haven't seen them, and that's a bad thing. Same with Mance going down. That's a good thing. If something's really good, we don't need to hammer home about how good it is. Play some more stuff. One True King, again, faction pick rate has dropped. Win rate's also dropped. There's a popular one out there. One True King, obviously, the Mel combo. We were going to talk a little bit about Kevin. And the question that wanted to be asked, or people wanted to ask, and then they kind of said, oh, we'll wait till the stats come out to see what happens. But essentially something that people wanted to investigate or want to know the answer to. Lannisters have recovered from being dog shit tier to now being, I'm going to firmly call them middle of the pack. Right?
Mid tier. Strong mid.
They are not one of the top 4. Night's Watch actually suffering a lot recently. I think a lot of people trying the likes of Cotter Pike and the off meta style Night's Watch stuff that we're seeing awful as well. But ultimately, like, Lannister are still not overtaking and coming into those top 4. They're not Greyjoy and Stark though. There is a marked difference between them now, whereas they were truly awful.
How is their highest commander, and who is the highest commander?
I'm 90% sure it's Tyrion is their highest commander at the moment.
Could even be Roose, maybe.
No, it's Tyrion. Tyrion, Roose, but then it's Adam and Kevin.
Adam and Kevin on their way up. Yeah, I mean, like, it's a question of whether or not Kevin. I mean, Adam's going a bit under the radar. I'm seeing a lot of Kevin get played. I'm not seeing a lot of Adam get played. Like, he's
not being played much.
I definitely see value in him. Like, he has great abilities, but his pick rate is not that high. Like no. Kevin's was just like 20-something%, right?
Yeah.
Adam's still at 9%, 9.9, 10%, call it, for the last month. But his win rate is solid at that percentage.
Do you want to see something absolutely degenerate?
Let's see.
This is an Adam Marbrand list, yeah? This is Blood Rain versus Swarvek, actually, which is why. And I know this result. Are you ready? It's Adam in Warrior Sons. It's a champion Faith of Warrior Sons. It's a champion of the Faith of Warrior Sons. And it's Gregor Clegane with Tyrion Pycelle.
That was triple NCU, 7 activation.
Yeah. 3 Warrior Sons.
You know what?
It's probably not shite.
Yeah, it's a hard skew.
It is a hard skew, 100%.
It's a hard skew, and that will have a place. Oh wow, is that? That's a. I mean,
it's 4 NCU dragon
against 4 NCU double dragon. What the fuck? Swarvek, mate. Like, I mean, you got to stop smoking whatever you're smoking. Like, I mean, I already had that kind of, I mean, like, I already thought that way about you, mate. But whatever you're smoking, you give it a rest.
Yeah.
Give it a rest for a couple of days, because that's too far off piste. Come on, just turn one of them into Jorah. Surely. I mean, Peter's just turned up to say, like, he thinks that Drogo is much worse when you work out how to kill Jorah. Yes, but you still got to go out and kill Jorah, right? Like,
yeah.
Why is this list not got Jorah in instead of the 4th NCU? But yeah, Lannisters, I think that they are having a resurgence off the back of Kevin. I've found him quite tough to play into. I think that Predictable Maneuvers is an exceptional card. Predictable Maneuvers is particularly an exceptional card into people playing a higher activation count than you, because there will be a single maneuver that they want to do at the end of the round. They will possibly even engage you and then go to do another thing after it because they have these 2 actions after you. So they engage you with the first one, and then they have this one last thing where they're going to follow up, and you're like, oh, predictable, you do that, then I'm going to get an attack with the thing you just engaged with. Or Kevin crossbows mean that predictable maneuvers always has a unit which can make a powerful, influential attack off the back of it.
Yes.
And that is something that Mance doesn't necessarily have with his predictable maneuvers. He does not have a unit where when you activate out of absolutely nowhere, all you are is within crossbow range, but you don't even have long range in Free Folk. There's not a unit that just says, oh, if you do your last thing this round, I'm just going to absolutely batter you with a powerful 6-dice sundering attack. And I think that's very significant into making that card even better in Lannisters than it is in Mance, where I also believe it's a powerful card, though dwarfed by the fact that there are, Wildling Diplomacy and whatever his other one is, Long Plan.
You mean
also,
Endless Horde copy too?
Yeah, exactly. And double my chances of having Endless Horde card.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think that card alone is enough to play Kevin, plus the fact that he has Lannister Supremacy, brilliant ability, in that as long as it doesn't come with Tywin's shit cards.
Yeah.
Throw in Wealth of the Rock,
which is decent.
An amazing card, and I forget what his other one is.
Seeing His Flaws, which is the Alistair card.
Flaws, you know what? Is two free tokens, and there's nothing your opponent can do about it.
It's not just that as well. The Kevin ability to remove abilities when Kevin is attacking the unit is deceptively good against defensive units, because it means they go, haha, I've got all these Kevin defenses, and Kevin just goes, and? I don't care. I don't care if you've got this thing where you heal, because I'm just attacking you, and you don't get that because I switched them off. But yeah, the thing with predictable maneuvers, I was having this conversation the other day. Predictable maneuvers back in 2021 wasn't as strong. Obviously, it was the same card, but actually, the big thing with 2021 is that there were no forced actions ever. So yes, you could buy time, and it was good at buying a time, like a tempo play and things like this. But back in the days of Offal Crossbowman as well, Offal could kind of say, "Well, I'll just activate through it anyway. Fuck it. What are you gonna do?" And even against even Lannisters had a predictable back then. It would have been like Poor Fellows or Warrior Sons maybe moving out of crossbow range, which is probably the best they could have done. None of that is actually viable, or it's not game winning necessarily. There will be scenarios where it is, but the vast majority of the time it won't be. Because if it's game winning, then the Night's Watch player just doesn't do the action. There you go, done. The
other very interesting interaction with it, having not heavily played a Relentless faction for a long time, is God, it fucks Relentless so hard, because start of turn I declare Relentless, which says that I have to take an action.
No, because you're wrong. You're wrong, because I know what you're about to say.
Relentless. You not respond with predictable, and then
I respond, and then you resolve Relentless, and then I resolve predictable.
Yes, but
you don't target until resolution.
Yes, but I can't choose not to take an action with Relentless, I'm pretty sure.
Correct. You're active player with Relentless. So you resolve Relentless, and then I say, right, I'll target that unit and the NCU. That is after you've done your free maneuver or retreat or whatever. Because the card doesn't resolve until after Relentless has already resolved. So you've already done the action.
And there's no backtracking.
No, as far as I'm aware.
It actually has zero effect on Relentless.
Yes, it literally, Relentless completely counterplays any of those type of start of round cards. You don't know that?
Today I learned.
Relentless.
Nice to know.
Relentless completely counters coordination tactics.
When you think about the simultaneous action in that way, yes. Yeah.
Any start of turn triggers are completely outplayed by Relentless.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, you're right. Yeah, when you think about it like that, whereas what I thought would happen was I'd declare, you declare, and now I can't undeclare that I'm taking an action, and therefore I'm forced to take an action, and we'd simultaneously resolve, which obviously then says before yours acting out before I resolve. But no, yeah, you're right. I think I got fucked by that, but it won't ever happen again.
Get wrecked.
Yeah, no, I mean, you either are incredibly theoretically, you're either incredibly theoretically up on the game, or you're the person being screwed by it, and then you're like, I'll never be screwed by that again.
Yeah,
is roughly the two ways that you can learn how not to get fucked in this game, in my opinion.
the funniest shit, as you'll probably be aware, Carlo, although I guess less for you, slightly, simply because you play less events and you play less people, because you're running events typically, or other things. You're not playing as many people online, maybe. But one of the things you go away and learn is you go away and learn how the fuck does your card deck interact with quite literally everything else in the game.
True. I mean, I feel like I have known that in the past for certain factions, but by the time I'm onto my fifth faction,
you stop.
I don't.
No.
I stop trying to dedicate to learn every single interaction it's going to have before I ever play it, and I'm just like, well, we'll learn by playing.
Exactly. But yeah, the interesting thing, so the predictable discussion that I was going to talk about is the obviously, the fucking stupid change to the rules, in that meaning that you can't pass in combat, just made predictable better.
There is that, which
that's just fucking stupid. I hate that. I honestly think predictable is the best card in the game, even outside Endless Horde, because there is actually zero counterplay, and you have to make a decision. It's different if your opponent does something and you just respond to it or whatever, but like, you actually can't counterplay predictable maneuvers if you've only got one unit that's engaged. You have a choice, and it's an illusion of choice, and it's so frustrating. Because
it's just as bad.
What?
When you get taunted.
Yeah,
Mickey knows.
Yeah. When you get taunted,
fucking meme taunt. What a piece of shit ability.
Yeah,
I know what? For all the chat that taunt's still a meme, I've been absolutely fucked by it recently. I think twice. Like, the two last times I played against taunt, I just got absolutely fucking hammered by it. Because again, I put it into that category of like, so didn't care about it, I just forgot it existed. And then as soon as you forget it existed, and it is costed around the fact that you ignore it, and if you ignore it, it is a very powerful ability.
Yeah.
If you think about what's going to happen, then you can avoid it at all times, practically. There's very little your opponent can do to force you to walk into taunt. But yeah, as soon as you forget that it happens, you're just like, God damn it.
Do you know what's really funny? When you taunt a unit like Greyjoy Bowman, Carlo, into your unit, and they kill you, and you go, shit.
Yeah, I was actually thinking that I believe you played predictable. I activated. You played predictable. I was like, I pass. You say, no, you can't. I'm taunting you. I charge you. Your predictable does fucking nothing.
I made an attack.
And my charge kills you.
I made an attack and didn't do a wound to to silence men or something, because I missed. And then you killed my things in response. And I was like, well, the odds of that happening were I still think I made a good play, but fuck me, that was terrible.
I still remember that as me getting fucked.
Yeah. This is the funny thing. You literally, like, no, you didn't win the game off that play, but it definitely helped you win the game, and yet it felt bad.
So I got fucked because I had no choices. It was just, you just waited for my last activation, which I couldn't do anything about, and then there we go. The illusion of choice. Anyway,
but the other side of predictable, where like the buying of tempo, like this saying like can't do an action with this, while it is good and it does have a place, very much so, that has counterplay. that I think when we see predictable used a lot more, when I say a lot more, with it only existing in one place in the game, it simply isn't seen in that higher proportion of games. Yes, people think about it, but nobody talked about predictable maneuvers really in conversations last year with what you would face. Now, that doesn't mean it wasn't good, but the simple fact of the matter is it wasn't the thing to talk about, Othel crossbows being much more interesting. And from Mance, people were much more concerned about wildling diplomacy.
Interesting is a debatable term, but okay, yes, there were more pressing matters.
Yes, they're more pressing matters. Whereas now predictable obviously has a very, as I said, terrible interaction with engaged units that's just bad for the game, in my opinion. But it's also appearing under more than one commander, so you're seeing it. The populace is seeing it more and played in more different scenarios. And as a result, I do think that people are now seeing what it could have done previously. The difference is that you didn't see it that often.
I do think that people may even need to start doing things like not saving their engaged activation until last.
Yes.
Because that is a very common thing. Your opponent has activated. It's just me left to go, and now I'm going to engage a unit. Now I'm going to make that attack up and saving that attack till later because I know it's a safe attack. I know it's a thing that I can do last without any interaction happening. But that's no longer considered safe if it's predictable. If it's obviously the last thing you're going to do, then I'm just going to wait and use predictable on the very last activation because you've allowed me to do so, and you can't do anything else because you're engaged. Whereas if you at least have two options, do them the opposite way around, second to last turn, activate, when they haven't played predictable maneuvers, you activate that activated unit, and then your last activation is with something that can pass. It's in a position that it can pass because you have to consider that your last action is not safe against anybody that has predictable.
Yeah, and it's funny because ironically, playing the Mance mirror, which I've done now a couple of times against Jacob and things, me and Jacob talk about this quite a lot. When you play that Mance mirror, it's actually something that forces your kind of set of plays to be very strange towards the end of a round, and you kind of end up doing things in a wonky order, which looks really strange, but in a Mance mirror it makes a lot of sense. Anyway, on kind of the topic, should we go over to events now? Because we talked a lot about everything, and we haven't talked about events yet.
A new event and a new challenger has emerged. I believe Lockerbie has just put up a brand new tournament.
He has, hasn't he?
Off of the back of the discussion about wanting to people claiming to be interested in a clock-based TTS event. Lockerbie's jumped on that one and thrown it up. There is a link.
There you go. Time has come for a limited time only. A clock-based event run by Lockerbie, using the same suggestions that we talked about before. He uses slightly different clock rules.
You sound wildly enthusiastic.
No, I'm reading it. All right, I'm reading it. Jesus Christ.
It's a tournament and people can play. Cool.
See you later, guys. No, it's so it's not switched for those kind of things. He's saying it's switched over in case of those types of things between rounds. So he's got between rounds while counting VPs and resetting. The clock is paused. I'm fine with that on TTS. I don't think that's an issue if they want to pause the clock in cleanup. It is something we didn't discuss earlier, but actually you were talking about how you give it to the opponent whose first turn it is in the next round to promote movement.
Yeah, we didn't quite elaborate on it. That is something that we changed. First time I played Teddy, we paused between the rounds with the idea that if one person is finished and the other person hasn't finished because they're thinking about whether or not to discard cards or something like that, then they'll click the time back over to their opponent and just say, "Come on, then, make a decision." Teddy came up with the idea of a game, just simplifying it. Always be as simple as possible is the concept. And the concept was whoever's first in the next round will change 50% of the time, and so you do the cleanup phase in their turn. Because again, the idea of this is to make sure that both players get at least 45 minutes of playing time, or like fair time, equal time in a 1 hour 45 tournament game. Now, if we're limited to that actual 1 hour 45, then we don't want any additional dead time, because that means that somebody may play for. We may have 10 minutes of shared dead time if we pause in between rounds. It might be the upper end, but it could realistically happen. And then we could have one person playing for 1 hour, and that leaves another person playing for 35 minutes, which again comes back onto this bordering like 2-to-1 time preference, which is unacceptable. So like it was proposed, and I agreed and tried. That it just doesn't seem to be a matter of problem. But I will add on to that. I've played 5 games on Under the Clock, and we have not yet got to the point where somebody's like desperately just like, I do this, click you, right? Because we've not come under less than like 15 minutes left to play.
Yeah.
Interestingly, one of those games did go to like the 5th round, and it was with high activations. This was like a 9 activation versus 8 activation list. Both players playing high activations, both playing a very aggressive technical list, and it went all the way. So, do as you choose. I'm just saying, these are all the things that like there are many opinions on the way they can be done, and I think the community just kind of needs to come to a consensus, and whatever kind of like gets agreed upon will actually work out fine.
Yeah. On that note, obviously, on TTS. Yes, you want the playing time to be 1 hour each or whatever, roughly speaking. But on TTS, the beauty is like between rounds, we're not limited by time in the same way like it is an event. And what, on TTS, I know it's slightly different, but even just something simple like sometimes players want to just quickly grab a drink between rounds. That does actually happen fair amount. You're in the comfort of your own home ultimately, and you're not out there. Something simple like you might bring a water bottle to an event, and you'll fill the water bottle between games. But there could be a chance where you've only got a small glass, and it's like, I've smashed that back, right? I'll just quickly refill it. And you might want to between rounds to do that, or a quick loo break, whatever people decide. On TTS, that's less of an issue because you're not hindered by round times. But yeah. I think that's going to be good. I look forward to seeing what happens
Brand
there.
new tournament. When does it start? This week?
Sunday the 12th.
Got this weekend to sign up. Yeah, 6 days. 6 days to sign up.
Impressively starts this Sunday, and he's given it till the 10th of July. So that is 1 full, 2 full, 3 full, 4 full weeks potentially, if people need it. Cool. Awesome. So, other events that have run. I just want to give us a quick shout out to him. Peter Shikachev. Jesus, I butchered that nearly. Akold. He won an event in Poland with his Targaryens, which, for those of you who haven't been following along, he never won an event. He never beat Bloodraven. He never beat Masara. He never beat Slavek.
Yeah, you have to give up on Lannisters in the end, right? I mean, he has tried a few different factions, but yeah, I mean,
well done,
Peter.
Yeah,
well done. I'm glad you got a win.
We also saw Stee, Psycho Stee, win War of the White Cloaks, White Rose Cloaks. Now, I will put a little caveat on that, and this is not to say that Steve doesn't do very well. 3 wins with neutrals, again on the bounce. Very impressive. But there were 4 undefeated players at the event. Unfortunately, they didn't have enough time to play all the required rounds of the player numbers they had. But actually, so congratulations to Steve, Phil, Tom, and Sean for all going undefeated. If we're talking about like secondary points or unit destroyed points being the only separator, without them having to play games against each other, then realistically, that can come down to so many things like matchup and opponent and things like that. So, well done to the 4 players there, all going undefeated on that day. And also a small shout out to Nova, who from our club, Carlo, Amy, who went 1 and 2. But the reason this is important, that's her first game, first pickup of win.
First win. Well done, Amy.
Who she loves playing the game. She plays it a lot. And she's getting there with nice watch. Running John next.
Second place for Phil's a big result as well.
Yeah.
Phil's a new regular at our club and a sufferer of Mickey and myself.
Yeah. So, congratulations to those guys there. Steve's really working his way up the rankings with his neutrals, though. In fact, I think he's the second best UK player now. He's in the top. Yeah, he's taken over Jacob. Taken over you a long time ago, Carlo. You're shit, man.
I mean, I dropped out of the top 8 as soon as I started playing Greyjoys, basically. I'm calling Steve out. Steve, mate, you need to go play some real players. Get yourself to a real big boy tournament. And no, it's really good. Really good to see that he's still doing really, really well with those neutrals. And I think that it's really. I mean, I believe he got some flack because he took like triple flayed men or something like that. Right?
He did take a triple flayed men.
But personally, I think that there's a lot of talk about the Leeds event being a lot more beginner friendly, a lot more kind of growing of the community. It was never expected to be 30 players. It's really good that they managed to get them. I mean, there's a whole discussion going on about like whether or not we should be looking at more 2-day events, whether or not 30 people would turn up for it if it was a 2-day event, all that kind of stuff. But I think that he's come at it with the perfect mindset, which is that if you go to an event which is hosted in such a way to be much more beginner friendly, to take on the challenge of playing a bad faction and a faction that you're not used to is absolutely the way that you should look at a less competitive event like that. And he's shown that it's absolutely possible to prove that a bad faction can be played really, really well. So big props to him, showing that he's really got the goods.
So yeah, well done there to all the players involved, of course, and congratulations to the Leeds scene as well. I'm really glad that they got a lot of players, and I'm really glad, and hopefully that Leeds scene and the Leeds store there will grow even more, and it's again more players to the UK scene. And I hope that's true of not just the UK, but other events around the world as well. Saw that New Zealand had, we talked about last week, their first event popped up, which was great to see. Saw their first event run, and it looked like they had a good time. So yeah, well done there. And just well done to everyone who's played events as of late and just been getting people into the hobby and the communities, which is the most important thing after all. So this week coming up, we have quite a few little treats. We've got a Spain event, Valencia, which I think is one of the startings of one of the new kind of like almost league events that they're running in Valencia. They're like running a series of events, like a series of tournaments, and it's one of those. So brilliant. We've got the Battle of the Bar Stewards happening in Daventry. I believe this is the second Battle of the Bar Stewards. I feel like there was one before, but another Daventry event, which I actually looked at trying to get to Daventry. Pain in the fucking arse, public transport. So I won't be going. But I really hope that people do attend if you're down that end of the country. We've got Chelmsford Bunker having their Clash of Members happening again. It's like becoming a regular event, their monthly kind of event. So that's great. We have the regional event for Mythicos, their second store at Moorhaw is having an event. That's not how you pronounce it, is it? How do you pronounce it? You know.
I was waiting for it. As soon as I saw it, it's Marwa.
Marwa. Oh god, of course it is. I just can't read. Marwa. New Jersey. Marwa. That's more appropriate, right? Marwa. In New Jersey. So yeah, go check that one out if you're in the area. I believe that's going ahead, and hopefully there's going to be quite a few people attending. Chaos's Ladder at Gigabytes Tabletop happening in GA. It's Georgia. So yeah, hope that goes well. You've got another one happening in Roseville in Minnesota, MN. So I think it's Minnesota, not Maine, is it? No, Maine's MA. No, it's Massachusetts. I haven't fucking clue. I never learned the US states.
This one takes 3 days, so
Yeah,
I'm going to assume that the end date isn't quite right on that, but possible.
Maybe.
Well, and the Kansas City regional qualifier.
Yeah, and Kansas, and it gets more. North California.
Is that 5 qualifiers
That's
running for this?
NorCal, Kansas, Roseville, Georgia, and more war.
More war.
So
more DACA.
More DACA. More DACA.
More DACA from New Jersey.
So yeah, five different regional events happening just this week.
That's interesting because I didn't even think that they would. I believe that there was a time where, I mean, they are pretty spread around the country, but where like dates had to be verified by bringing the conversation full circle back to where it originally started. You know, like organized play would have to validate a date, and they'd check against other people that were running qualifiers on the same date. Surprising that that effectively they allowed 5 to be running on the same weekend.
Yeah.
But I assume they're pretty far apart, and there's no real coverage, no similarity in the player base in them, or really anybody would expect to travel to more than one of them.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it'll be interesting. You know, Weasel jokes that 72 will qualify and 18 will show up. I mean, it's a real risk with more uncertainty around the event in general.
Mm-hmm.
Way back when, you know, like I think it was a D1. A regular popped in to say that we should take a look in the Sunday Slaughter Discord. There is a discussion, you know, Robert Fulkerson himself has turned up in the Sunday Slaughter Discord. So, like, you know, I'm sure practically everybody, at least who's live, is in the Sunday Slaughter Discord. You know, like, go and have a look at what's going on, maybe ask some questions if you can of him, see if you can get any kind of answers. I'd be interested to know.
I was going to just do a short thing at the end of the video just saying what he'd said there for those of you who aren't there, or those listeners on podcast or watching recorded. But we'll cover that in a minute in detail. Yeah, we've got 4 events, but they're not really 4 events. And I know, Carlo, you've actually been talking to the guys here at Middle-earth War Games in Bangkok, Thailand. They're running like 4 groups for an event. So they can play mini tournaments against each other, basically.
Yep.
And that's happening this weekend, which is great. And I think it's great, as much as it is, you know, time where we're taking time to explain to people or talk to people in the community. I think it's actually really great that he had questions. He approached us with questions about running his event. Because if people have got questions, it's okay to ask and approach us and talk about how something should be run or queries with something. And sometimes it can be really simple things, where it's just like, oh, by the way, this, and they can go, oh, I didn't know that. You know, that's...
Don't expect an instant response, though.
No.
No. I'm not very good at answering questions. If I read it and I haven't got an immediate answer for you, then I'll probably forget about it and not respond ever. So you need to poke me a few times.
Yeah.
If you keep asking, I will definitely answer. Mm-hmm. But I mean, this is a way that you can run a multi-group event. You can also run it through a single tournament if you want, but then you will need to manually pair everybody so that they don't get paired against people from different groups. This is, in some ways, the simpler way to run it. I know that they then want to go ahead from this into a knockout format from the winners of each group. So then they'll have to form a 5th event, which has only the winners entered into. Hopefully all of that, we'll see results from all of that, because that'd be really, really great. That'd be a great influx of new players. We haven't seen a lot of results come out of Thailand or any real significant kind of site interaction. So I really hope that does come off, but it can be quite hard to run such an elaborate tournament. The site can cope with that tournament, but it's not the simple case use. I hope that they don't have any problems. You know, like I would always advise somebody to run a simpler tournament for their first one through the site, But hopefully, it all works out, and hopefully we end up with 20 odd new people from Thailand all entering their results and using the site, because that'd be really, really good to see. Love to see new communities come online and get more worldwide recognition from their playing.
Definitely. More community and more players interacting and more people in the community. We can start pointing to places and going, oh yeah, by the way, there's this guy in this country. One of the few things that I really like is seeing a new player and they go like, oh, I'm in this location, and I can be like, hang on, there's this guy I know from a community that's like in roughly that area, so I'll point you in his direction because he might be the person. And then all of a sudden, like, of all things, the Canadian group seems to be the most common one where I do this or have done it. But Pete like point, and there's like, oh, I'm based in Ontario, and it's like, oh yeah, that's like 100% like was where Bruce is basically based and things like that. Now it turns out, North America, they're still like an hour and a half away from each other. But the point is that it's a community and it's stores and it's events happening at least near them.
Yeah.
That they know they can go to if they want to. So yeah, we've also got the Overclock event that's starting this weekend as well now. Sign up if you want to play with clocks online with Lockerbie. I don't want to play with Lockerbie, he smells. We've also got some events happening in Russia on Monday, which kind of counts because by the time we do the show next Monday, they'd already happened. So we should probably mention them now. And the Polish are playing on Tuesday, but we won't go into that. That's next week. So that's what? 1, 2, if you count those two. 3, if you count that one. 4, we'll count that as 1. 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 events happening between now and next Tourney Ground, which is
great.
Yeah, it's good. So I really hope they all go ahead. I really hope that everyone enjoys them. I really hope they all have a great time and enjoy using the site, of course. But not just that, just enjoy playing the game. And I really hope we see some interesting things, like see if someone else wins with neutrals. Let's see if someone wins with who's utter god. Let's see if someone wins with Tywin. I don't think we've seen anyone win with Tywin for a very fucking long time.
Not since the last ELO tournament.
Not an event anyway. Yeah. So yeah, let's see that happen. And yeah, as I said, the last thing, Rob Fulkerson has actually been active on Sunday Slaughter. He's posted a couple of things talking about his experience a little bit. I won't read everything that he said, but he does reveal he left on good terms. It was an amicable split. It's not just kind of like thrown out the door, good riddance. And he the organized play department, as we knew it, had only been him since January, February of last year. That's 2021. So he had been running it solo. And with him departing, he is kind of like waiting with bated breath just as much as anyone else is regarding organized play and what is going to be happening there. Brief comments around the fact that he did actually have the marketing and social teams at CMON working with him, and he could talk to them, and they were doing things with him, so the communication internally seemed pretty good. And he was actually fairly comfortable with the way that Asmodee organized play was working in relation to Robert as well. Seems like Asmodee, certainly the organized play department at Asmodee, were not a problem for him to deal with, which is good to hear. That's what you want. He does actually then straight up say that their distribution is bad. He's aware of that, and he says the words, yeah, their distro is crap. So he knows that Asmodee are an issue, and it seems like I would go as far as saying CMON internal staff are aware of the distribution issues, and it may be something that they cannot do anything about. We've had that conversation before with Michael and Fabio, like without actually having the conversation. But that does bring an element of realism, I think, to their understanding of the situation, and they just know they can't talk about it. They know they can't deal with it, so why bother even discussing it anymore? That's good. But apart from that, apparently someone had misplaced a distribution sheet about 2 months ago, which is why a load of stuff suddenly was quite late in Europe, because stuff was never sent out. Again, an Asmodee issue. Anyway, if you want to go catch up all that properly, do go into the Sunday Slaughter Discord. if anyone's got any questions or anything, feel free to ask here or ask any of the one of the players interacts with them. So, Carlo, your light's gone off. It's getting dark. Is there any last things you want to add to today's episode?
I'm gonna do a Mickey, which is I'm gonna promise Mickey's gonna do some work, even though I can't make him do it, and he's never said he's gonna do it. I've got a deal for you. We are at very close to a real milestone. We are 950 subscribers. When we get to 1,000, Mickey is actually gonna finish the new intro.
Ah, okay.
So we don't normally beg and borrow and do all the shitty YouTube stuff. But seriously, guys, if you watch this far, then please just subscribe. If we get to 1,000, it'll actually be, it could even be a significant change for the channel. I have no idea what actually happens, but things do happen on YouTube when you get to 1,000. Real things happen as opposed to like 100, yay, or even 500, yay. But 1,000 is a real milestone where they consider you actually to be a real channel that they give a shit about. So if you could just click subscribe, then we'll find out. And Mickey will finish that intro for you.
We also have coming up the 100th episode of Tourney Ground. That will be not next week. That will be 97. Then we've got 3 more weeks after that.
We've been doing this shit for 2 years.
I know, right? Well, at 100 episodes, there will be a special announcement. And you'll probably all hate it, and you'll probably go, well, that's not good. It's not a good thing that you've said this. But we will do an announcement at 100 episodes. And then we'll see what happens after that. We'll see what happens. 96 now,
yeah. I think I'll be here for 100. And then, but it'll practically be my US farewell show, and then I'll be away, for like 4 weeks after that. So I think 100 will be possibly quite a significant one. I might make 101. I can't.
What day do you leave? Do you remember?
I leave on the 16th.
No, you're not making 101.
Right.
So there you go.
1, 2, 3. 4. Oh, yeah.
You might just make
101 should be on the 11th.
Okay, you might make 101. All right.
I won't make it to 2 years.
Carlo taps out before 2 years. I'm done.
Yeah.
No, but we are, going to do some things for that as well. So yeah. Anyway, I hope you will have a good week. I hope that Carlo's lights and electricity actually managed to make it for him to achieve some stuff. And we will see you again next week. And best of luck to anyone playing, and sign up for that Lockerbie event that he's got going.
And the Welsh GT.
Oh, Welsh GT. Yes, sign up for that. Or LGT. Sign up for that now, otherwise the tickets will be gone by tomorrow. You won't have a chance. We need you. Right, anyway. We're going to go. See you later, guys.
Ready, aim, release!